Happy 4th of July, America, and welcome back to Human Reaction, your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics, where it's always our mission to arm you with the tools you need to cut through media misdirection and resist the mono-narrative. We have a great week of news this week, David. What are we talking about?
It's been wild, yeah. So SCOTUS is about to repeal the whole of the progressive era, but not the empire bit. So everything but that. Second, Democrats drank so much of their own Kool-Aid, they fell asleep and woke up to realize that Joe Biden has been doing a weekend at Bernie's thing for the past 5 years.
They just figured it out. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
We're going to review Project 2025's plan to hand out red dresses and little white hats to everybody in America.
Is this a Handmaid's Tale joke here?
And what's funny about that is I wrote that joke, getting ready for this, and at the exact same time, the Biden Twitter actually posted literally the exact same thing.
No way.
Imagine if your worldview is so simplistic that that's what you think is the actual goal of...
Wow.
This Biden-Harris HQ account, which is like an official account from the campaign, they keep posting things that are just like, man, you often just make Trump look better on the things that they post. They're always like, can you believe? And it'll just be like, Trump being kind of human. And you're like, okay, I guess.
And in the skiff, we're going to be talking about Trump comes out as RFK Jr., and we'll be reviewing Chase Oliver's speedrun interview with The Hill.
All right.
And maybe talk about France. We'll see.
Heck yeah.
Before we get started, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a review, whatever the thing is on the platform that you're watching us on. And also, thank you to all of our members and the people that subscribe to our Substack. If you wish to figure out ways to contribute to the podcast, go to humanreactionpod.com and you can support us there. Also, we got a meme of the week, and this comes from your brother, Joe.
All right.
Comes from Sam.
Repping
you have Joe Biden, and then you have Orange Joe Biden, and then you say, you have become the very thing you swore to destroy.
He does look eerily like Trump. Even the eyes, where the eyes aren't as orange as the rest of them in his eyebrows.
I also have a little bit of added stuff, and this kind of goes into our Weekend at Bernie's situation. I found this beautiful thread of Kamala Harris. I'm now Team Kamala. Right now, I think that she's the best person to have on the ballot this election.
Are you gonna get hats for that?
Nah, I don't think
I would be down for it, but I just want you guys to remember this is what we could have if Kamala's at the forefront on the stage on everything.
And as always, Wakanda forever. Paid for by Kamala Harris. And as always.
The paid for it. Yeah. Just straight face. Paid for by Kamala.
I have like 20 of these. I might just throw them into the middle of the episode. Who knows? I have them at the ready.
Okay, and for those of you that may have been living under a rock or just may not be aware, the reason that we're going to be doing such things is that, since the debate between Trump and Biden, there's been so much talk and fervor within the Democratic Party about who is going to replace Biden, because now that's the narrative, right? Is Biden is out, he can't do it. The debate performance was the blindfold being pulled off of all these partisan Democrats' eyes, like, oh my God, he's actually senile and has dementia and he can't do it. So now that's the narrative that Kamala Harris may be our next president.
We'll see. We'll get to that. But before we do, Sin City next week, Joe.
Yes.
Me. We're gonna throw some dice and record some people.
Dice? We're gonna play some craps?
Craps? Yeah, something like that.
Sure.
I don't know what you do. I don't know how to gamble.
Blackjack, I guess.
I just show up and watch other people gamble.
See, I'm not really much of a gambler. I will play a little Texas Hold'em because I feel like I have at least some amount of control over how that goes. Not a ton, but enough. But no, it'll be fun. It'll be great.
More than you think in Texas.
Well, yeah, more than
like blackjack or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. But we're going to be down there. We have some folks joining us. You can join us too. It's not too late. Go to freedomfest.com. We have a promo code, HumanReaction50, and you can get $50 off on joining us in Vegas.
That's right. July 10th through the 13th. So it's coming right up. And, it should be interesting. I mean, obviously, we're going to be capturing a lot of really cool interviews. Some very interesting personalities are going to be there from the Liberty Movement. So we will be releasing content all weekend, and then I'm sure we'll have a cool recap show on the other side of that to sort of encapsulate the whole experience.
Yeah, at least in the skiff, if anything. But we'll be doing something.
For sure.
All right.
Let's get into it.
First up.
What is going on with SCOTUS? We have a bunch of different cases with SCOTUS.
This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thune at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success, from grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com.
I titled this Based SCOTUS because there's wins and losses here with this huge release July 1st. A whole bunch of decisions came out from the Supreme Court. We'll start out with the Chevron case because this is by far the biggest, and I called it. In the Discord, we were going back and forth. We're chatting about something. It's like pessimism, optimism. I was like, hey, look, a lot of things happen very slowly and then very suddenly. And oftentimes it seems like the things that restrain government are most often that way. Nobody saw, deregulating transportation happening for a very long time. It was a very entrenched interest, a very captured agency at the Department of Transportation, amongst other things that just like, there was a whole lot of socialism around that. No one ever saw going away. And then the Carter administration deregulated airlines as well as trucking and shipping and all kinds of other things. And that allows what DHL is. That's what created Southwest Airlines and many of these other airlines that have since sprung up since then and reduced the prices of flights so that we can go to Las Vegas, right? Yeah. That whole phenomena, happened out of the blue. Well, the Chevron case is very much like that as well, where for a very long time, the supposed Chevron doctrine since 1984 has been the standard. What is the Chevron doctrine? Basically what it is it's a ruling that said, if the language that empowers an agency, an executive branch agency, is vague, the courts will defer to that agency on their interpretation of that language.
Can you give an example of that?
So a good example, so the original one was the source of a particular power for a plant had a certain regulation, but the source was very vague, a water source or wind or whatever the source was that actually powered the coal-fired power plant or whatever. Wasn't clear about how the new rule that the EPA was trying to put onto this company would be implemented in that case, right? Or it ranges enormously. Every time you see a new executive agency, a new executive order from the president, most of those are usually new ways of interpreting existing law that they're telling the agency now to do. So every 4 years, you get this huge swing back and forth. And that's what justifies all these executive orders is a lot of that Chevron doctrine. Is it says that the agency can now make the law, right? Is effectively and become the terminator of that. Now, who in your schoolhouse rock, education.
Junction.
Yeah, right. Of the law, who's supposed to interpret the laws?
Well, I suppose the judicial branch.
Right. That's the standard model that we were sold, as a country, right? That's supposedly the constitutional model.
This is how a bill becomes a law.
Exactly. So basically what Chevron does is it basically says, no, the courts actually have a role here in adjudicating what the law actually says. So if the executive agency says, this is how we're enforcing this, and then a business says, like, wait, that's not how it was enforced before. That's going to cause me damage, like an injury. I'm going to sue you, and we're going to get a final decision on this. Yeah. And then you go through a process, an adversarial process with a neutral third party. Not
being
an
the court.
interested party,
Yeah.
deciding that, because the agency's an interested party. They're not just sitting out there. And this is why the progressive era is dying, right?
Yeah.
So clearly.
Well, and so the case that actually was heard was between a fishing company and a regulatory body, right?
Yeah.
Loper Bright versus Raimondo,
Right.
Where Loper Bright, the fishing company, they were being charged for like these visits from this regulatory company, like hundreds of dollars a week, like a insignificant amount, right? And they were like, where did you ever derive the authority to charge us all this money, right? And so that's the case that they ended up taking to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court used that to say this is no longer legitimate. Is that
Exactly right. And it was, and that's just like it's just the watershed case of the moment. There's been many of these lawsuits over time, and the court has reinforced Chevron. It never made it to the Supreme Court. And this is like the key part of like the very, very slow to fast, is it took many decades of intellectual building of actual institutions like the Federalist Society, all of this structure around that resulted in Trump actually putting in Gorsuch.
Because Gorsuch was
Kavanaugh.
a member of the Federalist Society, right? Was Kavanaugh too? Can't remember.
Kavanaugh, yeah. And Amy Coney Barrett was also associated with the Federalists and recommended by them. So in each of these are different justices with different approaches. Obviously, Gorsuch is the most based.
So are you saying that like it's just taken a long time for the Supreme Court to even hear a Chevron case, or a case that challenges the Chevron deference doctrine?
Because of the Trump appointees, this is the first court that would actually want to take this case.
Oh, I see.
Right?
So previous courts have just said we're not going to hear it because we don't want to challenge the regulatory state.
We have a more base court now.
Yeah,
Sick.
We have a better Supreme Court that's able to take on at least this issue. Now we'll get into some other ones that I disagree with the court on, or that have different philosophical bents to it. And obviously, some of this will be navigating who these justices are and their different philosophical views. But when it comes to this was a very strong 6-3 decision saying, no, this is the courts have a role in interpreting the law again.
Yeah, and those are the partisan lines in the Supreme Court, right? There's 6 conservative, quote unquote, justices and 3 sort of more progressive justices, right?
But that's going to break apart as we get into the other cases, for sure.
So before we move on to the other cases, what are like the really clear ways that this is going to affect our lives going forward as ordinary citizens? I mean, all this, the Supreme Court stuff can get a little bit in the weeds, I think, for a lot of average people. How is this going to affect our lives?
So what it means for most people right now is a bunch of fear mongering. Right? The sky is falling and it's all on Trump because, it's his fault, even though there's some in here where it's very clear that that demonstrates the independence of the judiciary for presidential immunity and other things here. But that said, there's an obvious election year bent right now where everyone's saying the sky is going to fall and we're going to, everything's going to be terrible because of this. We actually got a TikTok video about this very thing that we could review in a minute. What it really means is if you're a business who is being impacted by a new decision from a regulatory agency about vague statutes of law that Congress has passed, you can now seek a judicial remedy to that potential problem. It also puts pressure on Congress to actually legislate again and do their job and not just delegate everything to the to the executive branch.
To these like unelected bureaucrats that run things like the EPA or the FDA or these agencies that sort of oversee a lot of private business activity.
Right. So the interesting narrative here is the degree to which the other cases have the progressives freaking out because they're worried about executive power, but then opposing Chevron reform in this way. And they're saying, oh, no, executive power is so dangerous. We can't possibly let anyone have Trump have this power. But then when it comes to Chevron, they're saying, well, but if the experts aren't making all the rules, what'll happen to the drinking water?
There's also a perverse incentive there where the agency's powers are derived from vagueness in the law, right? Like that's kind of there's a perversion there that exists, like where you're going to want to create things intentionally vague so that it increases your monopoly on the control of whichever industry sector your agency presides over.
The agencies are one of the larger lobbyists for the legislature, right? Because they're the ones who go and say, hey, I'm part of the FDA and here's my expert opinion about this law and help actually craft laws.
Well, and think about all of the the consultant class that has made a ton of money on advising businesses on how to navigate the Byzantine architecture of a lot of these regulations. I mean, people pay a lot of money to try to figure these things out so they don't run afoul of these agencies and get fined even more money. So there's a whole business that's built up around this stuff. is this going to be a skies falling thing where this all kind of comes unraveling quickly, or is this going to be something where over time, over the next 5 to 10 years, we start to see regulations kind of go away because they get challenged by
I don't
businesses?
even think that'll happen. It's actually a far more modest case than that. It just means that if there'll be some cases where new established case law will govern how to interpret the law, rather than the agencies arbitrarily changing every 4 years. So it'd actually probably be the biggest changes. There'll be less executive orders potentially changing these things.
So it might mean more stability.
Yes.
Like less just,
For
polar
sure.
swings of we're this way because now the Republicans are in power. Now it's this way because the Democrats are in power.
The rules are more clear, which is kind of what you need for a civil society, right? Is for
Well, and to run a business. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're trying to forecast and
like,
grow.
if you want stability in the economy, just in general, you want to make sure that the rules are clear. And if we are sitting here being like, well, everything's going to change in the next 4 years, like you can't operate that way in an economy.
Yeah.
Well, it's less extractive at that point, at least less fines in theory. I mean, these are all just forecasts based upon a rough guess about how much the businesses are going to want to stomach challenging these things, because that's also expensive, right? They have to pay a lawyer to then go sue the government to try to get a final redress of this.
Right.
And Chevron doesn't say is that agencies can't make new rules, right? They still can when empowered to do so. They just have to be clearly empowered by the democratic process, not by the vicissitudes of their whims. And so what we've seen is a bunch of misinformation like that. And I wanted to respond to this. We have a TikTok of a straight up, like, this is how it's being covered by most people off of social media right now.
Supreme Court's horrifying and terrible decision to overturn Chevron deference today impact you? Well, here's a few ways. Number one,
I already don't like him.
Enjoy flying in an airplane and being reasonably certain that it won't plummet out of the sky, killing you and everyone else aboard?
I'm sorry. Do we have that
Say
right now?
goodbye to that
be clear.
I got something better than that. Hold on, pause
Because
right there. I got a graphic here of deaths by airlines. And I want to say, when would you guess the Aviation Administration was created?
The FAA?
Yeah.
I'm going to say oh man, has it been a long time? Probably maybe the 70s?
1959.
I guess I wasn't
1958. So if you zoom in, you can see when it was created. You see 1940. And then actually after it was created, deaths increase.
Oh, wow. So right before the 1960s, yeah, deaths are...
It goes up before it goes down.
They were already trending up.
It may be.
I will say. So it could
More
be...
flights though too, right?
More flights, more people flying, more prominence
Right.
of the industry.
But you see overall actual accidents. Basically what it means is the FAA hasn't changed a lick of anything when it comes to this. This is like the most common error of the progressives. They say, if you put someone smart in charge, if daddy is there to protect me, I'll be safe. And that's just an assumption. That's not how it works. That's not how the real world works. All they do is make rules. And not to mention, we had the whole Boeing crisis, and this guy just says, I'm sure he even knows what happened with that. They haven't. Yeah.
Well, it's like, are there fewer train derailments now that we have the NTSB, or whatever authority overseeing railways,
or less? So what's funny is if you look at before we mandated education, fully, mandated everyone go to school under force of law, or going to putting their parents in prison. Literacy rates were already enormously high without any of that, right? If you look at all these workplace accidents after OSHA, it's on this huge decline, and then OSHA happens and it continues to decline. These things are fundamental forces that are a result of people valuing their own lives. Not rules, right? Rules are created by administrators. These rules are actually generated bottom up by most businesses, not by administrators.
Yeah.
We can keep watching.
That is the thing, just in the progressive era as a whole, is the more you study all of the implementations that came with the progressive era, you always see it's like they put the agency on afterwards, after things have already been having an upward trend towards being more safe, workplace environments being better. It's like we look at it in hindsight and we're like, look, it fixed it, but it was like, the trend was already there.
Right.
It's not necessarily been a fix or anything.
Well, and in some cases, the trends are the opposite. I mean, you look at the Department of Education. I think if literacy rates were really high then, I mean, let's look at a trend line of where the United States ranks globally for education in K through 12. It's not good. I think we're like 30th or 32nd on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's different, right? If you have a more homogeneous population, it's easier to get a more cohesive singular number and measure. We're a much larger population, and we're going to be more diverse.
Certainly far from being able to say the Department of Education has made education better in the United States.
Right. Yeah, especially as they've been funded more and more and more every year, as we spend more every year on education, is it actually improving? It's very well established. What we spend all that money on is administrators and bureaucracy, not on furthering kids' education. But I mean, each one of these, when you look at, there are some examples where it goes the opposite direction, such as banning of CFCs, right? Remember that? So did that decrease CFCs in the atmosphere? Yeah, those are some examples, right? In a sense. So
but did it replace them with something that's worse or equivalent with a different name?
Right.
I mean, that's always what happens, right? Oh, BPA is bad. Okay, we get rid of BPA. Now it's BPS. It's the same thing as one molecular change. It's basically the same thing. It's still giving you cancer. It's still in your water bottles.
Exactly. So let's keep going on this guy.
The Supreme Court is now in charge of the Transportation Administration. Number 2, do you enjoy being able to go to a restaurant and in most cases be reasonably certain that they won't kill you with the food they serve? Well, say goodbye to that because the Supreme Court is
we're all
now in
gonna get
charge of
poisoned.
the
Shit.
FDA. Do you enjoy having relatively clean air and relatively clean water that also won't kill you? Well, the Supreme Court is now in charge of the EPA, so wave goodbye to that.
Okay,
It's like Flint,
Tenant rights.
How
Michigan
many
never
times?
happened.
can't stand
How
this
many
guy.
times throughout American history has the EPA poisoned water?
Many times.
Should we pull up some charts on that?
Also, what keeps you from being poisoned is refrigeration, not rules by the EPA. What the EPA says is you have to refrigerate these certain things. And if it's a certain amount of time out, you have to get rid of it. Things like that.
But you know what else works though? Is having a problem and the public saying, hey, wait, I don't want to eat there because I think I might get sick if I eat there. I mean, and yeah, of course, preventing problems ahead of time is great.
Sure.
But also, you want to be careful to not burden businesses so heavily that they can't actually operate.
The steel man for the administrative state is to say that it is there to transfer best practices through an informational capability to say, hey, the best practice for storing of milk is X, right? Or storing of raw fish or whatever, or mushrooms or whatever. So those sorts of things is the steel man. That information happens anyways because that's how the economy works. The economy works on information and how to best keep from poisoning your customers. Not to mention, what is the fundamental there, right? And so and we can get to the steel man if we want to, or we can just go on because I think we've already kind of covered it well.
I don't want to listen to this guy anymore.
Yeah. And I have one from a Harvard graduate, law graduate, who's actually pretty good, but it's pretty much covering the same ground. So we'll continue on. All right. Also, a case that got covered less is Corner Post Inc. versus the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, which suggests that the actual injury here of former changes aren't limited by a statute of limitations that was implemented as like a standard statute of limitations of 6 years. So now if you were injured 10 years ago, you could sue. So that's going to open the floodgates of potential lawsuits or countersuits even more so.
Wow. So wait, so we can go back in time and say, hey, I was injured by this fee or fine or whatever, and I want some sort of legal. Oh, goodness. Speaking of injured,
Whoops.
Kyle's mic is falling off the table.
Just busted it. Nice.
See,
It just popped out.
Fixed.
maybe you should have listened to me when I said, hey, you can move that before we start recording.
We're good. We're good.
So we also have RFK Jr. shows he's a deep state asset. Now, I'm just going to dog on a little bit. This is his response to Chevron. He says, Chevron decision cuts both ways. The original ruling allowed agencies to function effectively, which they cannot if every interpretive gray area is in the law requires a court decision. That's not what it says. It says it may prompt a lawsuit if it's not a fair reading, if it's a reading that someone objects to, which is your right as a free American, is to disagree with the government. If the agency is working in the public interest, we definitely want it to exercise broad interpretive leeway. Are agencies working in the public interest, Kyle?
I don't know what you want me to say. No?
Public choice economics would suggest that they're human beings, and this progressivism this is the problem with progressivism. Once again, it assumes that if you have a smart person, what they're going to do is just be civic-minded and just create the rules that are best for everybody. But that's not what we know from public choice economics. It's not what we know from experience with these agencies. They get captured by the companies that they regulate.
Because companies
the
and
agencies exist to cartelize around whichever thing is their jurisdiction. Like, and they're always going to be trying to claw for more power in whichever way they can.
Well, right, and
it's just a natural way of things happening.
It's
right?
in the incentive of a business being regulated to try to stack their own people or people that are friendly to their company into a regulatory agency, referring to what you're referring to, regulatory capture, so that they get regulated in a friendly way and they put a moat around what they're doing so that other competitors can't come in. So
yeah, it's just
common.
it's mafia behavior. Like that's what it is. We just dress it up with fancy words that are to kind of disguise it. It's just mafia behavior.
But not
right?
the EPA. They're a completely neutral agency that that isn't at all captured by a particular philosophy when it comes to carbon dioxide. And
I'm sure the mafia also runs a good laundromat, right? But they're also like moving bodies and like it's.
So
garbage trucks.
For instance, almost every important environmental decision in the federal court over the past 40 years is based upon Chevron. Without it, the EPA, not entirely captured agency, is virtually proud. So he knows the regulatory capture agency. But when the corporate interests have captured a federal agency, then the same interpretive leeway gives the agency more power to serve their corporate masters. Okay, so now you're against Chevron? Thus, we had the FDA sending armed police to shut down Amish farmers and grocery stores. So what's so disturbing here?
Raw milk.
He understands that regulatory capture happens, but he wants to participate in the progressive delusion that these people are in the position where they're going to just make these decisions not without any bias. When all the evidence suggests otherwise, a lot of the evidence, and the logic, the underlying logic, that's what I mean about public choice economics. The logic of them is that they are interested people because they're just like everybody else. They're not special. They're not gods. And that delusion that they are special is false. And this is kind of like shows, Robert F. Kennedy as, okay, I know he's great on some stuff, but this is the thing where he just loses me. Like he just goes off the rails.
It's again, because like libertarians always try to force RFK into their libertarian. RFK is not a libertarian. He doesn't have the same opinions about the bureaucracy that we do, right?
True.
But he's attacking certain elements from a different angle, and that's where he's useful. He's useful in that way. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to this stuff, yeah, he's still progressively minded. He's still stuck in that milieu, right?
Well, I think some people think of him as a classical liberal, but no, he's a progressive. There's a difference.
Frankly, right? A lot of the people that label themselves classical liberals also get trapped in this mindset.
Yes. So. Well, yeah, but in this case, of being pro Chevron?
No, I'm just in the progressive milieu. Like they adopt that framework because it's the framework that we've existed in since the early 1900s, right? Mm-hmm. If not the late 1800s, like 1890s is kind of when it all started to come into place. But we take a lot of things for granted as like this is the way they should be because we've existed in that, and our entire education system is kind of built around that of like this is how the government works.
Right.
And right now, a lot of these cases that are coming forward and a lot of things that kind of the Trumpites are starting to try to implement, which we'll get into the future plans of all that. They're starting to begin to dismantle those core bases of the progressive framework, like in real time. And we're kind of watching that beginning to crumble right now. And these Supreme Court cases are just like the beginnings of that, right?
So he ends with the Chevron controversy is therefore a false dilemma with no solution. No, there is a solution, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The solution is if the legislature can't write a law about it, the executive agency can't enforce it because that's how a constitutional order is supposed to work. And if they're not smart enough, perhaps they shouldn't be in charge of it. Perhaps the government should have its power limited to only be able to do the things that they're actually smart enough to do. Rather than saying, oh, we're going to give some engineer who's super smart the ability to rule us. That's not how it works. That's not the government we were promised.
Well, it's true, but this comes at a time in human history where there is sort of this dichotomy between people that don't want a ruler and people that do. And I think it's probably predominantly human nature to want safety, to want to be ruled and controlled. I think a lot of people have that mentality. I don't agree with it, but it's interesting. This statement comes at a time right after the Libertarian Party of Colorado put RFK Jr. on the ballot for them in their upcoming elections.
I didn't think of that,
general election. So I wonder how they're feeling about this perspective, or if LP Colorado or the broader LP will have any influence over maybe getting a line to RFK Jr. saying, hey, like, actually, here are some different ways to look at this.
They did force some certain things to be part of his talking points. There was stuff about like the Department of Education. There was stuff. I saw a list of things that he said that he's going to adopt because of this.
Well, right. And so, going back a little ways, the LP Colorado made a deal with the GOP in Colorado saying, like, hey, we'll endorse any of your candidates that sign this pledge. And it had a laundry list of, important libertarian issues on it. I understand that he's signed something similar in order to garner this placement on the ballot.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of big things in there that I wouldn't necessarily think are RFK things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a good strategy from the libertarians, no doubt. I just, one of the things here is there is an innate tension between progressivism and democracy. And if you're going to say, oh, I'm pro-democracy, I'm anti-deep state, I'm anti-intelligence community trying to plan and plot out these power structures that they are trying to implement and control without any democratic input from the bottom, and you see Chevron as a good thing, you have an innate contradiction that you have to work out, because you don't actually support democracy. You don't actually support freedom. What you support is rule by the smart people, right? And when COVID happened, that's when a lot of this kind of stuff got unveiled for a lot of people for the first time. They thought, oh, wow, the FDA and CDC have way more power than we thought we realized. These influence of these agencies and the influence of the local rules that it had. In Montana, for example, our health official could fire the sheriff if they refused to implement the health officials' rules during a state of emergency.
A pandemic.
Yes. So, and that was literally a piece of law that happened before we were a state during the progressive era, right? It was old. Now we got rid of that. But that idea of a democratic elected sheriff has less authority than the appointed person who just has a little badge because they're super smart. That's the progressive. That is what progressivism is. And so when someone describes a progressive, it doesn't mean wokeism. It doesn't mean, I'm pro censorship. What it means is you're pro rule by elites. You're pro technocracy.
Yes, technocracy is the core of progressivism. Yes.
I'm going to coin a term: expertocracy.
Yeah, I mean that's more or less it. Like if you read any of the old progressive writings and kind of that squad of the John Deweys, the Woodrow Wilsons, all of that is they had a very clear vision in mind of installing experts across and building up institutions to be able to move society forward. And there's a lot of eugenics that go into that. There's a lot of it's being able to manipulate every single variable and try to create all the incentives properly to steer society in what you see as the proper direction.
Right. And that's the big question: is what is forward? What is progress? What is the end goal and state that these people want to achieve? And as we've learned in many, many cases, it's not a very pro-human future.
Well, and that's the thing is because in modern parlance, people look at progressive as I'm super socially progressive. I like gays. That's not what progressive is. That's not.
I use your gay voice when you do that. You're I like gays.
You are being intellectually trapped. You're building up mousetraps, and you're being controlled and manipulated. You are a useful idiot in that regard. If you are accepting that type of definition of what progressive is, that is and just be very aware of that for people that use that label. You're not helping what you think you're helping.
And to be clear, one more point here too. There are existing tools that are not going away because of Chevron. If, for example, a company pollutes your water supply, you can still sue the company for damages. That's not going away, right? So the fear mongering here is completely out of line with reality. RFK Jr. is completely wrong here. Now, when you said earlier with people want to be ruled, right? It's interesting because people want to be ruled, but they only want to be ruled by their people, right?
Fair point.
Which is the presidential immunity case, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of brought as a federal grand jury indicted Trump on 4 counts of conduct that occurred during his presidency following the November 2020 election.
Now, which case was this? The counts of misconduct.
What
did he do in this case?
This was the federal grand jury indictment case that then got challenged based upon presidential immunity. This isn't.
So is this J6?
Yes, this is J6.
Okay, so
yes.
This is around him, quote unquote, inciting an insurrection
and talking to. It's the case is ruled on whether or not he was allowed to talk to certain people and what he could say to those very certain people.
Sure.
So that's where it gets a little bit. It kind of goes both ways. Now, I'm going to be clear up front. I oppose presidential immunity. I don't think anyone should be immune from the law, period. But this is being turned into, this is something that has kind of all existed for a long time in many cases, has been argued by every president.
Like Obama
in the modern
striking American citizens and having no repercussions.
We're going to talk about that case very specifically, right? Because it was argued in that case that he made the case. That one case unites a bunch of these. He argues in that case that he has presidential immunity because it was the enforcement of the GWAT.
Global War on Terror.
Yeah, sorry. And the case was thrown out on standing.
Meaning?
There was no injured party because the person who brought the suit was Anwar al-Awlaki's father.
And he wasn't injured?
Yeah, well,
by having
basically just got thrown out on standing.
Awlaki was injured, but
Yeah, there was
he wasn't the one bringing the case for it.
Well, you can't when you're dead.
So the case here kind of threads between there, but every president makes this argument that they are immune from in their official duties. So what was found is, quote, under the constitutional structure of separation of powers, the nature of the presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for their actions within, this is the key part, conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority.
Okay, what does that mean?
A little bit more. And he's entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts. So, is it a Jan case, right?
Jan 6?
Jan 6. What did I say?
Jan case.
Jan
You
case.
said Jan case.
Jan case. January 6th case, to the degree that it is, then you're sitting like, well, is an official act to talk before the crowd and tell them to peacefully protest, right? Was that a violation of any criminal code? You know, like those sorts of things then become, okay, that still exists and still can be pursued.
Sure.
The question about whether or not he can talk to various different officials then gets very different. And that was actually one of the examples that talks about conclusive and preclusive of constitutional authority, which is, let me see here. He says very specifically that as an example within the decision that he would be allowed to talk to administrative officials of the election because that's part of the presidential authority in security of elections and from foreign outside people. Things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just so that I'm clear, what is conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority? Can we define that in layman's terms?
Basically, the things that he clearly has constitutional authority over, such as national security, such as the administration of the executive branch.
Gotcha. Right. And so would his indictment on his charges surrounding January 6th, are those potentially going to be challenged or overturned as a result of this court case?
Now, my reading of this, and I didn't get to really on this one see what other people are saying on this one, so I might be going on a limb and maybe I'm off base on some part of this, but my reading is that they will have to litigate that as an unofficial act. He's talking as a party leader or as a candidate. Quote, there may, however, be context in which the president speaks in an unofficial capacity, perhaps as a candidate or office or party leader. That would be considered, obviously electioneering is not it has always been there's a very firm line in finance and all kinds of things between official and campaign. If it's campaign, that means if you commit a crime, you're not immune, is what they're saying very clearly. So that speech would very clearly be that. But I don't think there's really a case to say that speech is really where the obstruction is. The obstruction is pressuring Pence to not recognize the electors, which gets a lot closer to official
actions.
Actions, because only afterwards did they make that illegal. So,
interesting.
Yeah,
they passed a law saying you can't pressure the VP, who is the
you can't. No, you have to count the electors.
Okay.
Yeah. So therefore, pressuring them is legal, right? You're asking them to do a legal thing. It's not illegal to ask them to do something legal. So
interesting.
Yeah, and I believe that's supposed to fall within the VP's role too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole thing. So he's basically just like, hey, can you do your job? Like, right.
And the argument, if I remember right, is do your job by when there was these anomalies in the counts that we believe might be fraud, don't count those electors, right? Which seems to me, just looking at it from the outside and seeing and my amount of reading on this is not, I'm not an expert. it does appear to give you an opportunity to say, well, this is an official action, and therefore it would cut off those avenues. So it to a degree and Trump put out a thing basically saying, I won, right, with this, which sounds very Trump, right? It's very much like, I won, I was the best.
It's the greatest election ever.
Greatest court case ever.
The great court case. But the left needs this as an inflection point. I mean, Biden's dying, right? We're going to talk about that in a minute, but Biden is just
Literally.
he's fallen on the polls. He has all these problems. So I got this Philip DeFranco, who is enormous, right? I mean, he's not.
Oh yeah, big YouTuber, but been around for over a decade.
Yeah, and this is he's now gotten to the TikTok space, and if you note the framing here of how he does the news in this way.
The United States of America now has a king, with a Supreme Court ruling 6-3 that the president has total immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts, but not unofficial ones. Though they also failed to define what an official act is and sent it to a lower court to decide. And that decision will likely be appealed right back to the Supreme Court. And with this, you had Sotomayor dissenting, saying, this new official acts immunity now lies about like a loaded weapon for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune, immune, immune. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And finish it. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide by will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent.
So
our democracy.
How he reads all of the dissent, but then makes no clarity about the actual decision. He doesn't mention that it's for conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. Right? So if he does something unconstitutional, such as break into an office in order to spy on his political opponents,
e.g. Watergate?
Yeah. Then he could still be prosecuted by an congressional investigation. If he sent SEAL Team 6 to go kill a political rival and Congress did nothing, you just couldn't afterwards also sue him for something if he's had a supposed authority, right? If Congress gave them the authority to kill people in the United States and he's executing on that authority, then what's the problem? Well, the Constitution's in the way. That would be unconstitutional, but then it will go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would decide that. That's how our system's supposed to work.
Yeah.
But the problem is like where he's right about and what Kagan's right about is that there should be, in my opinion, every time there is a violation of that, we should have the enforcement mechanism of being able to hold the president accountable to the criminal law if it's criminal, right? Such as
Obama drone striking American citizens.
Yeah.
Without any due process.
Right.
Yeah.
And once again, like none of these, this broke down to 6-3, right? So none of the liberal justices agreed, and they wouldn't have, would they, but the question that we have to ask is, would they have found this way if it was Admiral al-Awlaki on the line?
Good question.
Right.
Good question. I mean, well, it's hard to say though, because that's ruling against a Democrat president. Right, because that's an action of Obama.
But this is the principle, right? The principle is what matters here. And these are Supreme Court justices. They're not.
But we know principles don't matter, dude. Principles don't matter anymore. We are an anomaly in that sense, where we actually try to run our lives based on some underlying core values. Like there are not a lot of those left in American political discourse.
But this all seems like it all makes sense to me. Like if we have presidential immunity enshrined in the Constitution, which is it's there, right? Then if the president is acting constitutional, he abides by constitutional immunity. If he's not, so just whatever case is brought against the president, all you have to prove is it constitutional or is it not constitutional?
Well, it
right?
isn't,
like that's all it is.
It actually isn't clearly in the Constitution. So basically what it says is that in executing, they can do these things that would otherwise be criminal. That's the nature of government, okay? I can't go to your house and take your stuff and say, if you don't, I won't protect you. And if you do, then, give me your stuff or die. The president and the government are different than regular people. That's why it's based upon theft and extortion, right? So you can't go to the government and say, you stole from me via taxation and sue them. Is that executive immunity? Yeah, in a sense. But when you look like Federalist 69, Alexander Hamilton wrote that unlike the, quote, King of Britain, the chief executive of the United States would be, quote, be liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law. Federalist 77 says, quote, subsequent prosecutions in the common course of law, in addition to impeachment as checks of the abuse of executive authority. Right? And these were Federalist, remember, the Federalist Papers are written to try to persuade anti-Federalists to adopt the new Constitution, right? So the whole argument was that your executive branch is limited by the criminal code and all these other things. In fact, impeachment itself is based upon high crimes and misdemeanors.
Which is interesting. I mean, just for laymen, like we think of a misdemeanor as like not a very serious crime, right? That's like less than a felony. So clarify that language. Why is that important?
I gotta remember that. I can't remember that. There was a whole thing I did in college about that. But it was still considered at the time high crimes, like felonies, right? High crimes and crimes against the state and things like that, and misdemeanors, meaning even low level crimes could be impeached upon.
I see. So it's just saying both.
Yes,
I got you.
Right. So and once again, the presidential immunity case doesn't change the power of impeachment. It doesn't change the power of congressional investigatory authority over the executive branch. It doesn't change any of that. All it says is that private citizens can't sue the president for official acts he did while he was in office.
The hard thing about, because you're right, that the presidential immunity is not necessarily explicitly in the Constitution, but it's kind of implicitly there.
Yes.
Like the Constitution kind of gives guiding lines for what you can charge the president for, but there's nothing that's explicitly like president is immune from blah blah. That's where a lot of this just becomes sticky, right?
So,
there's a vagueness to it.
And if you look at the Cato guys, but they're basically arguing that they're just going too far, right? There is obvious an immunity to some degree. It's just how far should we go for it? And they take it as too far.
And that line is not explicitly drawn in the Constitution.
Exactly.
So
right.
what people might be wondering, as I am, what are the legitimate reasons for presidential immunity under constitutional authority?
For example, you order the FBI to go, raid this person, right, house under a warrant, and in that case, that person dies, right? You can't sue that person, the FBI agent or the governor or the president, for the death of that person.
Why? I mean,
because it was
it's a warrant.
Yeah, because it was a signed warrant in the process, in the execution of the law, right? So does that make sense? So
it makes sense.
Once
I
again,
don't necessarily agree with it.
well, it's just the extension of the non-anarchism, right? So anarchism say, yeah, of course you can, but in the system that we're supposed to be operating
we live under a certain game right now with certain rules, right?
Yeah,
like that's
sure.
Under
But
that,
I mean, obviously,
the
like-
government gets to do things we can't do.
Sure.
And with that, by its nature, I think is at minimum, it's at its best when it is a clearly written law that someone has clearly violated. There's a high standard of evidence that is then brought to a neutral third party, a judge, supposedly neutral. They're not always neutral because of relationship between DAs and judges that get very incestuous and terrible, but supposedly neutral and worried about its professional reputation and worried about, pressures, democratic pressures and institutional pressures to assess adversarially what the executive branch's case is, and then give you permission to violate someone's rights, their property rights, by coming on to serve a warrant.
Sure.
Does it make sense?
Yes.
Well, and the unfortunate nature of this entire decision-making process is everything's layered in an interpretation of, do you think January 6th was the worst thing that's ever happened in this country? Was it worse than 9/11? And so like everything has to be brought into that interpretive layer on like the commentariat class, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. We're not actually having a real discussion about, should presidential immunity exist? How much should exist if it does? That's not really where I think the parlance of the entire discussion is. It's probably where it should be. But right now it's like, how can we get Orange Man to go to jail? That's where the current thing is, despite being like, all the presidents have done terrible things, right? And it is like the stuff that we're talking about with Trump right now here is so low in comparison to a lot of the other things that we could be talking about, even with Trump himself or with every other president that's ever existed, right?
Well, and it tells you everything you need to know that we're talking about this now with Jan 6, not with Anwar al-Awlaki,
yes,
or his
exactly.
son, or his 8-year-old daughter.
Like it's the framing that we're operating under with having this discussion that is kind of the disturbing element of it all, right?
Right.
How is presidential immunity different from qualified immunity?
Pretty much the same concept
for police.
Yeah, qualified immunity is the same idea for police, right? Qualified immunity basically means that as a police officer, if you are within the bounds of your executive authority as granted by your state legislature, you can't be personally liable for
accidentally killing someone who's innocent.
Right. Or
which is probably the basis for why you disagree with the concept of presidential immunity.
Absolutely.
And I would agree with that.
Because you need the incentive of the individual actor on their individual decisions and behavior. Otherwise, if it's only the group, then your individual actor can hide.
The question though is, with the way that the judicial system has been weaponized, with the way that, we're not dealing with a fair justice system, is there, does not having presidential immunity just open up a president to just all of these sort of like wanton legal challenges for every damn thing that are just meant to kind of create roadblocks and challenge him at every turn?
I think that's one of the undertold stories of this so far, is the degree to which lawfare, this is a pushback against the very idea of lawfare, right? Making laws through, basically waging war against somebody using the law. Governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin resigned. Do you remember why?
Wasn't it some sort of sexual misconduct thing?
Nope.
Was it not?
So many lawsuits against her and against the agents and against her government that basically they became completely paralyzed.
She couldn't be effective at all. Sure. Well, and there's a certain, like, to steelman the case for presidential immunity, you could almost look at it as kind of this Rousseauian general will. The president is kind of the one that's supposed to execute on the general will of the people. So, and they have to make a lot of the tough decisions. And sometimes those decisions might necessarily land on a certain moral or legal principles. And like, in order for the president to be able to act, you might want to be able to give them some sort of immunity so that they can be a little bit more clear-headed in their decision making.
Sure. And
they don't have to worry about the lawfare stuff. Like, that would be the steelman of presidential immunity as a whole, I would say. I mean, you take it or leave it. Like that. I think there's a logic to the argument.
I was
right?
just kidding. As soon as you said Rousseau, I was like, whoa. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So
everybody has mousetraps that they have to deal with in their heads. Right? I said Rousseau, and Dave's like,
I hate that guy.
Well, we'll have to dig into why at some point. But I'm curious. Like, say the president was executing on national security, right? There was a constitutional, legally declared war through Congress. We were waging that war. In the course of the warfare, an innocent American was killed. That American's family couldn't sue the president for the decision to grant, the authorization of force in that way that caused the death, the untimely and unfortunate death of that American citizen. Is that sort of like a reasonable case for how presidential immunity would work in sort of like the not lawfare sense?
Yeah,
like
as long as the court also decided that the action involved was constitutional within his constitutional authority,
which national
statute.
Defense
and
is.
by statute. Yes.
Right.
Well, I mean, not all, right? I mean, but there is lots of legislation around national defense that says if you go to the other side, the rights no longer apply to you, right? And the question is the degree to which Anwar actually was, to the degree that they actually had a solid case, and second, to the degree that his son was. And
Sure.
we have no evidence that his son was that I'm aware of.
Sure.
So, or
The problem-
even easier cases is like, for example, the Bush administration was caught multiple times spying on American journalists.
Yeah.
Right? And they were just saying, well, I mean, you were calling someone overseas and we thought they were terrorists.
So that's a case where the president should not have immunity.
Well,
right?
and that's the area where there's a certain vagueness and there's a certain balancing act that you kind of have here of like, how much can they, because if it's in the interest of national security and that's in the constitutional duty of the executive to be able to do that, then it's like, well, maybe you can conduct capital punishment without a trial, on Anwar al-Awlaki, right? Or maybe you can violate the Fourth Amendment. That's where the complications of the vagueness of this happen, because there's a lot of overlap where these things don't necessarily mesh that well together.
Right.
And then everything just becomes in your interpretive layer of like, do I like this president or not? Yeah. And then that becomes the layer of which I analyze whether or not they should have immunity, right? Like, that's how I think the mousetraps in people's brains work on this.
I think that's
stuff,
actually
right?
absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is in the case of Kagan herself in her dissent is pretty much going off the rails. I mean, she completely leaves reality
Totally.
and dives into this whole thing that Philip DeFranco just quotes.
Can get SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political rivals.
Right. So this has become the message, right? The president's now a king. You didn't care with the War Powers Act of the 1960s. You didn't say shit when all these things were happening. You didn't care when Obama was conducting the war of drone warfare across the Middle East and starting new wars all over the place. You didn't do nothing. I have a media mashup of them saying it's a king for 5 minutes straight. When the president's they wrote a book in the mid 2000s. And this is kind of going back on the conservatives, saying the imperial, the monarchical presidency, right? That this is a whole trend that we've been on for at least 50 years of giving the executive more and more power. And this is a very dangerous thing. Yeah. So quit giving them all this power and actually have legislators legislate narrowly or face consequences for it.
Yeah, but they can't because the incentives are for them not to upset their donors, and the donors don't want them to legislate very much, right? They want the regulatory state to insulate them from, all the things that they want. They want to be able to pay their way to whatever outcome they want.
And that's the part of it where you have to force them to. That's why Chevron is another example of that, or that's why you need consequences for your president if they don't have just and dual authority.
Well, and the important thing to note, it only makes Trump a king. It doesn't make Biden a king. Yeah, right. It doesn't make the future president a king. It's just Trump that is the king.
Yeah, right. You can trust the kind old man. He's just a nice, gentle old guy.
Nice old
we're not talking about like all presidents. It's just there's this one case, and it's like it's going to make him be able to pass for all of his wrongdoings. And it's like we're not worried about everybody else. It's the one guy that we're worried about. That's the important piece of understanding the propaganda around this, right?
Correct.
Let's move on to the social media case.
Exactly.
Here.
Well, and this is when I was kind of mentioning the vagueness of like executive agencies going out there, and you're actually saying this, Kyle, executive agencies spying on people and then saying it's for national security and get away with it. Mm-hmm. Well, rather than have that actually be adjudicated, because it isn't exactly a clear case that they can because of the Fourth Amendment, which doesn't mention anything about electronic communications. It only mentions papers and effects. What does that mean? Well, if you listen to Scalia, and I was actually at a Scalia event where he says like, well, the minute Congress wants to, digital information and phone calls to be applied to the Fourth Amendment, they should add it to the Constitution. I was like, you son of a... But at least it's compatible with his philosophy, which is what the word says is what it says, right? And we can't make... with the Supreme Court shouldn't be reading its intent into the law.
Sure.
That said, effects is... There's a good case for that. But anyways, the context here is in 2021, Florida and Texas enacted statutes that would regulating large social media companies and other internet platforms in an attempt to curb ideological censorship on the platforms. Net Choice, interesting stories about Net Choice from the book I read recently about Surveillance Valley that we should get into. Net Choice sued, arguing this violated the social media company's First Amendment rights.
And what is Net Choice?
Net Choice is like it's a 501c3. They do advocacy, education, and they do legal services for tech companies. They have some very interesting connections to intelligence agencies.
Everyone always seems to.
Imagine that.
It's crazy how that works.
And for more on that, I don't have all the details in front of me right now, so let's not dive into it too deep. But you can check out the book Surveillance Valley on that. And their kind of takedown of Net Choice.
It is weird how there's like all these Venn diagrams of intelligence agencies.
I love Venn diagrams.
Oh, do you know who else loves Venn diagrams?
Who, Kyle?
Here, let me just. I want to show you guys.
The potential future president of the United States.
Yeah, I want you guys to know, like, just like how there's Venn diagrams of all these things. Somebody who really loves Venn diagrams.
I love Venn diagrams. I really do. I love Venn diagrams. It's just something about those three circles and the analysis about where there is the intersection, right? Yeah, I see people, you agree with me, right? So I asked my team, I brought props.
She brought props. she brought some Venn diagrams.
She brought props.
Sorry, I had to lighten it up a little bit.
Lighten it up. I'm terrified.
So in
the president.
This resulted in Moody v. Net Choice. Basically, the court said, this is really frustrating to read. You can't prove the government's actions resulted in you being censored on social media. Therefore, there was no injury. Therefore, there is no case. That's what they basically said.
In effect, nanny, nanny, boo, boo.
Yes. They don't have standing.
Right.
If you look at it, like Glenn Greenwald makes an excellent case about how this is in line with the GWAT decisions around privacy that said in the global war on terror, we can surveil you. We can do all these things because the global war on terror exists. Therefore, when you say, hey, are you listening to my phone calls? We can't confirm nor deny. And then the courts say, like, well, they can't confirm nor deny, and that's national security. Therefore, there's no standing. There's no injury here.
I don't have a case about getting banned from literally every platform because apparently I'm a terrorist. That's what this is reading to me right now.
Clearly, you're a terrorist.
Because of the
Well,
GWAT.
the government merely suggested that some tweets and posts violated the terms of services that already exist in the company. It didn't demand it.
Yeah, I read those suggestions in the Twitter files.
And this is where Alito, this is a very interesting thing I think has actually been under talked about. Alito was appointed under George W. Bush. He was appointed and he has been on the other side of these throughout this. So unlike most of the GWAT case, in this case, he says this is the most important First Amendment case seen before the court in years. He said, quote, for months in 2021-22, a coterie of officials at the highest levels of federal government continuously harried and implicitly threatened Facebook with potentially crippling consequences if it did not comply with their wishes about the suppression of certain COVID-19 related speech. Not surprisingly, Facebook repeatedly yielded. As a result, Hines, which is one of the users who was part of the lawsuit, in the Moody side of the lawsuit, was indisputably injured, and due to the officials' continuing efforts, she was threatened with more of the same when she brought suit.
Wow.
So
threatened or injured by the decision, but obviously it says she was threatened with more of the same. Was that from the government or from Facebook?
from the government.
She was threatened by the government.
Not surprising. Facebook, as a result, Hines was indisputably injured, one of the parties, due to the officials' continuing efforts to not her, to threaten Facebook to then censor her stuff.
Sure.
Right. And so this is the important part of it. We have two court cases. So the government can't go after you because it doesn't like you. This is a great comment. Is NRA versus Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, or the other one? Which Cuomo am I talking about? The governor of New
Andrew's
York.
the governor.
Yeah, Andrew Cuomo was going after the
Was
NRA
the governor.
as was going after the NRA and everyone around the NRA, basically trying to isolate them, trying to place an embargo around them, saying if you deal with the NRA, you can't deal with the state government.
Right.
And the ACLU representing the NRA against them because that's obviously suppression of speech. It's just doing so indirectly. So an indirect threat or an indirect coercion against your people around you is just as bad as doing it directly. And the indirectness of it is an important subtlety of the First Amendment that we have to be firm about because that's the erosion that will actually result in real censorship. Second, we have Bantam Books versus Sullivan in 1963, that the government can't censor by proxy or by proxy threat. You can't. This bookseller was selling books that the local government didn't like, so the local government started threatening them, basically saying, "Hey, we're really worried about this sort of thing. That would sure be a shame if your building were condemned, that sort of thing, right?" So if you go to Facebook and say, "You know what, President Biden, you should take down these posts," and did you know that President Biden is a real big fan of antitrust? That's a threat. That's a threat to go after your company. Duh.
We'll be in touch.
Exactly. Yeah. So by them like basically saying there's no standing here, they're avoiding the issue and they're kicking it down the road to probably never be solved. So what this means to me is that as long as the court is made up of these justices, which was split, right? It was Barrett and Roberts joined the libs for this. Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas.
Kavanaugh on the lib side too?
Yes, Kavanaugh as well. And that's not surprising, right? Barrett and Kavanaugh are the two more prosecutorially friendly. That's obviously why they're on the immunity case. They're more of the enforcement side because they come from that world before they were judges.
Interesting.
It's the Bantam Books for Sullivan case for governments can't censor by proxy is an interesting one that I feel like there needs to be a lot more just legal work that's done there because so much of everything that's going on with all of the problems with government are them doing things by proxy.
Yes.
It's like, like the Fourth Amendment, just getting third-party data brokers in order to do mass surveillance spying. It's the entire censorship industrial complex that we talk a lot with guys like Mike Benz and Schellenberger. Right? All of those things, like the Twitter files, all these things are something by proxy, NGOs, DARPA funding, all this stuff, and it's by proxy, right?
Big Venn diagram. Yeah.
It's a big Venn diagram.
First of all, it's 3 circles.
3 circles.
Yeah, and one other thing, the CISA and various different agencies of the censorship industrial complex, as revealed by the Twitter files, are all over this lawsuit. They're all over the decision. I was quite at the CIS, the CTIL. A lot of these are all over that. So it could have been. They could have so is the SCOTUS based? They could have been more based.
They could have.
They could have been way more based here, because going into that would have been a huge indictment on the Obama years, on the Obama creation of the whole apparatus that we have for controlling the internet and social media in other countries, that was then turned on us in the wake of Brexit, in the wake of the Donald Trump presidency.
Well, classically, Gorsuch and Thomas are just going to always be the most based. Like, that's just the nature of the things, right?
Right.
Thug life glasses for both of them.
Excellent. So, but something I did do was based was January 6th prosecutions were overturned. Real quick, we'll just touch on this real quickly. 1,400 people were charged with obstructing the law using Sarbanes-Oxley, which was an old Enron case created law in order to be able to prosecute people who defraud the government or interfere with government operations. But it was likely done in a too expansive case for that. So that got won back. That's 63. Amy Coney Barrett was actually a dissenter in that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And actually we saw one of the liberal justices join the other side just on the principle that it was obviously a violation of Sarbanes-Oxley's limitations, right? It can't be used that expansively.
Interesting. So, I mean, I'm just curious about the dynamics here, because it seems like in some of these cases, there are strict kind of partisan lines that are drawn. And some of them there's crossover. And the crossover, is that strategic on the part of the judges? Are they acting politically in that way, or are they do they have a particular legal worldview that says, I agree more with this and I agree less with this?
I think it's more so the latter. If they all have their worldviews, they all have kind of somewhat immunity from the partisan stuff. Like, there's obviously partisan stuff that happens, but a lot of the partisan stuff is much more, I think, just because of their worldviews. And the system's kind of set up to be designed like that. And I think it actually kind of works that way, where, you have Republicans will generally have a certain view of how legal practices work, and and kind of original intent of the Constitution, and like Federalist Society leaning type of stuff. So like that worldview will typically lend in a partisan, quote unquote, fashion towards the Republicans, while like the more the living document of the Constitution, all that type of view will lend more towards the Democrats. And Democrats are obviously going to appoint the ones that have that view, and Republicans are going to have, it's like, I think that's where the partisan nature is, but there are differences that can be picked apart between all these justices.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. So, and then one of the reasons why the justice flips here, it does make sense in the sense that the over-criminalization and the use of non-criminal statutes to criminalize, or that's not quite right. It is a criminal statute. The use of this in an expansive way is a good example of the expansionary features of the criminal state, of the justice state, that people don't like on the left. So it's actually you could judge it as like a very, like, is it a calculation? But there's not really a benefit to that calculation, other than that their reputation is better with people who don't already like them.
Sure.
The people who do like them, on the other hand, are in the other category, right? Who are going to be like, why aren't you going after Jan 6 people? So there's really no win for her.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's you could look at that as a fairly courageous, principled stance to take.
Yeah, and I think it's a good demonstration for the other, hopefully, some leadership from the left on, like, here's how to think like a principal, in a principled manner.
Yeah, they could use some of those.
Urban camping regulations are deemed not cruel and unusual punishment. This one is
huge.
versus Johnson. It is enormous.
This is huge.
And not well covered. Like, it's chevrons everywhere, but this should be way bigger.
Well, so I guess for a little bit of context, and we haven't really talked about this at all publicly, but like, we've been behind the scenes sort of working on this documentary around urban camping and the camper situation that has cropped up in Bozeman and in other seemingly sort of like immune little small towns that don't have the sort of sanctuary city problems. And and this is one of the bedrock cases that has sort of laid the groundwork for a lot of cities to say, yes, it's legal for you to pitch a tent on the sidewalk and live in the street. And the Supreme Court took this case up and overturned it. So now it is legal for municipalities to ban urban camping. And obviously a lot of people on the left are looking at this as sort of like criminalizing homelessness and, really oppressing these like victimized people who are down on their luck, et cetera.
Yeah.
David, how do you look at this case?
Yeah. So the context was that the small Southern Oregon town basically said, we don't care about the Boise v. whatever. We're still going to have this on the books. A liberal group sued to try to get them to stop it. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was decided that it is not cruel and unusual punishment to require people not to camp, even if the government hasn't provided beds for them. And that was the core of it that seemed to me most obvious that was going to be a problem for the justices. The one, they get into a lot of the nuance of cruel and unusual punishment. One of the minute the origin of the Constitution, Gorsuch writes the opinion, so it's super based. And it really makes clear that, like, okay, one, this isn't cruel and unusual punishment, and two, the government doesn't have a responsibility to provide housing for you, right? So, and lastly, judges shouldn't be the ones deciding what homelessness policy should look like. Should it be indulgent or should it not? That's not a role of justices. That's really the core of the case. Quote, homelessness is a complex issue. Its causes are many, so there may be public policy responses required to address it. The question this case presents is whether the Eighth Amendment grants federal justices primary responsibility for addressing those causes and devising those responses. A handful of federal judges cannot begin to, quote, match the collective wisdom the American people possess in deciding how to best handle a pressing social question like homelessness. The Constitution's Eighth Amendment serves, and this is a cruel and unusual punishment amendment, serves many important functions, but it does not authorize the federal judges to wrest those rights and responsibilities from the American people and in their place dictate this nation's homelessness policy. Now, the exact same people who are saying the president's now king and that the court has taken all this power using Chevron is now criticizing them for not empowering the judges to force the forced localities to have homelessness policies that they like.
Once again, I will reiterate, there is a complete and utter lack of principled understanding of fucking anything.
There's a lot of people look to the Supreme Court like they're going to create this blanket either banning or support of whatever their pet thing is that they want it to be, fixed. Like they want the Supreme Court to be able to be like, now abortion's the law of the land, or now it's actively banned across the entire country. But like the dismantling of Roe v. Wade is, no, the states decide, because that is technically constitutionally how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And this is another one of those things where it's like, no, there's not, the Supreme Court's not making a decision on like how the states are supposed to operate. It's just like the states now have the ability to decide how they want to operate, or municipalities or whatever. But like, there's a decentralization of law that is happening right now with the current Supreme Court, which I'm very much in favor for.
Absolutely.
Where now it's like, okay, that state can do what they want. Like municipalities now have more control over their rules. That is the great base nature of the current Supreme Court and how things are trending, right?
And that's the thing, is this one isn't being talked about because it so clearly is so unpopular, because the homelessness epidemic, the explosion of it is so unpopular with so many people. Like California losing all these folks, everyone moving away from it. The sheer amount of expense and cost in these places, and the sheer disaster of the human cost of the government's inability to handle any of this stuff. It is losing the left. The left is losing on that issue. So they're not going to make a big issue of it. So they've kind of pigeonholed this. Yeah. But it is incredibly important for the future of it, because the old regime was based upon the Boise case. And that Boise case was held as, if you don't comply with the Boise case, the ACLU or one of these liberal groups is going to sue you. And
so does the overturning of this case sort of nullify, in a sense, the importance of Martin v. Boise?
Yes.
Interesting. Well, and you've already seen, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but Missoula, a fairly liberal bastion within the state of Montana, has passed rules restricting camping on city property, even just in like the week since this case was brought before.
Yeah, and people that aren't from around here, they might not realize is we have this massive camper problem here in Bozeman, where there's just certain areas that are just camper communities basically that have come up on just side streets, and there's a lot of like drug dens that are coming out, and it's
crime.
It's pretty insane.
Yeah, I was speaking with someone who works with water and sewer here at the city of Bozeman, and the amount of effluence that's being like just flushed into our storm drains and into retention ponds, and the amount of trash and like drug paraphernalia and all sorts of stuff that you don't want to see or think about are just like kind of flowing out into these different, the environment surrounding these different areas. It's a huge problem, like environmentally, which you would think the left would be a little more concerned about, right? But it's obviously it's two of their pet issues, kind of like coming head to head. So where are they going to go?
The only people who pollute
there's
are
incentives.
corporations, Joe.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
And the city
But
is
corporations are people, so
the city is setting up incentives that make it more like camping on the side of the street would be something that you want to do to be able to avoid whatever fees that exist, because like the actual fines for doing it are so minimal that it's just like, well, you might as well do that instead of paying property taxes or paying rent or whatever,
Right, exactly. Well, and there are anecdotes, and only anecdotes at this point, that we've heard of people who own homes, who are renting out those homes, on Airbnb or whatever long term, making money on that and living in a camper somewhere in town because it's $25 a month. Mm-hmm. And you get free, free taxpayer funded trash pickup and porta potties by your camper ground, whatever you want to call it. And like there's several
and
of
it's
these
not
around
in a
Bozeman.
campground. Like that's the important thing is like it's just, we're talking on just on streets within the city, right?
Oh, totally. And some of these are like thoroughfares. Some of them are a little more tucked away, like areas that are yet to be developed, but there have been streets that have been constructed, right? And so there's curbside where you can sort of park and
like,
be out of the way
outside of schools and things like that. It's,
certainly
there's
close
a lot of
to some
concerns
schools.
about children, and
There are
all that.
there are. It's a big point of contention, and obviously, like this case, and overturning this, Grants Pass case doesn't, like they said, doesn't solve homelessness. It just really allows municipalities the autonomy to figure out how they're going to deal with it
What's best
internally.
for them. Yeah,
right.
what's best for their situation. Now,
Yeah.
will that change in Bozeman? Probably not. We're probably going to get exactly the same rules in Bozeman because we got a very liberal city government that's not interested in that. And
I think you're right about that for now, but I think there's a sea change happening.
Yeah,
Well,
when that change comes, that's where like now it's a little bit more possible.
that's
to
an
have the
opportunity.
change
Yes.
happen,
Yeah.
right?
So Las Vegas isn't going to change. They're going to stay the way they are. All these
Seattle,
other
San
different,
Francisco, Portland, LA, they're stuck.
All right. So,
But like you said though, I mean, like I've seen news reports out of Seattle where I grew up, and there are very liberal, like lifelong Democrat, lifelong Seattleite individuals on the news and like going to city commission meetings saying like, this is unacceptable. I can't let my kids walk outside our house. There's human shit outside of my house. Or, crime is just running rampant. And obviously, like, those cities have a tremendous problem. It's going to be a much longer road for them to resolve those than it is for a community like Bozeman or Missoula or anywhere that's like a little smaller and hasn't like let that set in. But I mean, I would say, having seen what happened in Seattle, I would encourage any municipality that's ahead of that's not quite as far down that path to really reconsider, because it's super sad to see what's happened to that city.
So going on to the next story today. Oh, wait, real quick.
Oh, yeah, I threw in here something that unfortunately didn't go through is the Supreme Court declined a case challenging OSHA's authority and constitutionality. Clarence Thomas is like super upset about it because he wants to just get rid of OSHA.
Right? Such a baller. God, I couldn't like that guy more.
He's super based.
All right. And then the Democrats are looking to replace Joe Biden, potentially? That's what it seems like. I don't know. I spent all week citing a house. So you guys tell me, what happened with the Democrats and Joe Biden?
Man, well, it seems like there's this split in the Democratic Party where obviously the people closest to Joe want to stay in power, want to keep him in power. Sorry, of course he's running things. Like, they're not running the show for him. Of course not. But they want him in power. And then there's maybe this like broader coalition, surrounding the DNC. It sounds like, Obama, while being overtly go Joe, is behind the scenes saying like, we got to get him out. There's no way he's going to win. So there seems to be a little bit of friction within the Democratic Party.
But
on this.
There's also a lot of questions of who do you replace him with? The bench isn't that big, right? Do you just throw up somebody to be a sacrificial lamb and this election's a loss? Like all those types of questions are happening right now. Biden, as of yesterday, there was a bunch of things that was like, no, we're still running and we're going strong. Fight, fight, fight. All this stuff, right? But what we have is the prediction markets have been going pretty wild. They've been quite volatile this last week because like every single statement that comes up, it's just like, oh, Joe's going up, Joe's going down. But the prediction markets over at Polymarket, which I find hilarious because Polymarket is being treated like a poll, like polls right now, and all it is it's a crypto betting website for predictions, right?
Yeah, the prediction markets have been referenced a lot lately.
Yeah, well, and specifically Polymarket. Good on those guys.
Absolutely.
I know one of
Do
the
you have
guys
to
over
have
there.
a certain coin in order to bet on it? Or is
Yeah,
it-
there's like Solana, Ethereum,
Oh,
et
you can
cetera.
bet on
Yeah,
anything.
I believe it's set up on Polygon, but like which is a layer 2 of Ethereum. Blah blah blah. I can't remember exactly how it works. I've never actually bet on here before, but I have used previous prediction markets that weren't on crypto, and they've always had liquidity problems, and everything got crashed. But now this is like. It's like I find it
mainstreaming.
hilarious that CNN is referencing Polymarket for polls. Like I find it hilarious.
Is that a note on the relevance of Polymarket or the irrelevance of CNN?
I think it's more so the relevance of this because I'm seeing just like everything on Twitter is Polymarket for using these polls because polls aren't fast enough. So people are putting their money on things to bet on things, and that's
Interesting.
what people are. And there's probably a lot of insider betting that goes on with prediction markets, right?
Stacking the.
Well, if you-
There's that type of stuff that
if you
goes
know the
too.
Wall Street Journal's coming out with a new poll that suggests that Donald Trump is down by 6, you might
throw a few $1,000s behind your betting
Right.
odds over here and juice your numbers.
right.
Interesting.
Did I
Well,
say-
so with
Yeah,
that, a disclaimer should be take this with a grain of salt. Obviously, This
Yeah,
is just
it's funny to
people
watch
gambling.
because traditionally prediction markets have been pretty good with election predictions and things like that. Like I've followed prediction markets for a while. I've bet in prediction markets on elections in the past. I made a lot of bets on the 2020 election. Got all of my congressional and Senate ones wrong. Got that presidential one wrong. or sorry, I got all my congressional and Senate ones right. Got my presidential one wrong last election. It's weird how that worked.
Interesting.
But
Don't notice
so
that.
the Democratic nominee is set at 44% right now is to be Joe Biden. They're putting Kamala Harris as at 37% of being the nominee. They're putting Michelle Obama at 7%, Gavin Newsom at 5%.
I'm surprised that Gavin's so low.
I think I've heard from a lot of people, and this is sort of a synthesis opinion of sort of the maybe all the takes that I've consumed, but that Gavin is the future of the Democratic Party,
It's 2028, right?
and he's just not quite there yet.
He's a white guy. He's a white straight man.
Well, exactly. That's. I mean, yeah. There's that. He doesn't fit the mold of what you would expect a typical Democrat candidate to be right now. And who knows? Maybe that changes after, like, say, Kamala sort of assumes the throne, if you will, either through Joe saying I can't run and the 25th Amendment her in as president or whatever. But the other piece of it is that like Gavin Newsom is not very well liked by the sort of the middle.
California
right?
is not very well liked.
Right. He's
Yeah.
viewed as this like coastal
true.
elite, this like kind of snobby dude who like doesn't really relate well to sort of like the labor side, the like the blue collar side of the Democratic Party. So I'm not sure he's like really positioned well
He's
yet
also
to be
an,
successful.
he's also an empty vessel, which is nice for the Democrats,
Yeah,
right?
but neither is Joe Biden for the. Remember the time that he like threatened that union worker?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
like-
but he always had that sort of vibe, right? Like
Yeah.
in years past, maybe before he got so senile, he was at least a little bit more palatable to the labor vote. But I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong there, but I think that might play into why he's polling so low.
Also in the prediction markets, you have Donald Trump has a 63% chance of being the winner of the election, and Joe Biden has a 13% chance, and Kamala Harris has a 12% chance. That's where the current predictions are right now.
Wow, that's looking bad.
It's looking, but it's just every single thing with Joe is just looking bad, right? Like they've turned on him. And we talked about this last week when it was just Joe and I when we did our debate coverage, but it's just they're trying to throw him under the bus right now.
Do you think that the sense of panic that we're perceiving or the sense of contention that we're perceiving within the Democratic Party is real, or is this a projection or a front to sort of give them a little bit of cover for a larger, deeper strategy that they have coming? Because what I've understood is, right, like we talked about the timing of the debate. It was pushed earlier than it normally is. I think, and I've seen it said, and I agree with this, the format of the debate was not designed to help Joe, right? Had there been audiences, I think both of them could have played more off the audience, but Joe certainly would have had a little bit more of an ability to get a raw response on some of the things that he said, especially attacking Trump in the ways that he did. with this sort of anechoic chamber of these two just talking to a couple of journalists up there, it was not very favorable. So they pushed the debate up. The format wasn't good. They've basically set this up to throw Joe Biden to the wolves and replace him with someone, but we don't know who and we don't know when. And it plays to their benefit to do that as late as possible, as I saw someone say, because the media can run sort of a really favorable rose-colored glasses cycle where the new, anointed one within the Democratic Party gets their 15 minutes of fame, and the honeymoon period doesn't run out before the election. If they announce someone soon, then there's enough time for the real dirt to come out and the real candidate to sort of emerge.
I think that there's always been a tension with Biden and the Democratic Party at large. I don't think Biden was ever supposed to be the chosen nominee in the 2020 election. I think in 2020 they were trying to manufacture new Obamas. And that's what Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, and Beto O'Rourke were, is they were supposed to be these new, manufactured, we got this youthful energy that's coming up. It's going to be just like Obama, in the same way that Obama was kind of manufactured in a sense, because he was like a no-name, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we're going to let you give the lead speech at the DNC, and we're going to, and everybody's like, oh, we like this guy, and it was kind of manufactured around it. Because the Democrats haven't really had a real primary since Obama versus Clinton, right? It's all been, and we know that from 2016 with the WikiLeaks drops, right? They manufactured the Democratic and cheated that election and snubbed out all of the competition, and it's Hillary's turn, right? We know that from the WikiLeaks that happened. But a lot of people in the Democratic primary in 2020, they weren't latching on to Peter O'Rourke, Beto O'Rourke, Pete Buttigieg, and Kamala Harris. They didn't latch onto him. Pete got probably the most attention in that, but everybody was looking at Biden as yeah, remember those Obama years? We like Joe, and they remember him being a lot more with it. And then eventually everybody just kind of fell in line and went for Biden. But I don't think he was ever the chosen nominee necessarily. Yeah. And I think that they've wanted to push him out for a long time. They just never really were able to, and they kind of had to consolidate because they didn't have a bench. And now they're sitting and they're kind of throwing it to the wolves right now. They're like, well, we got to do something, and this might be the way to have a restructuring of the party. I think there's a restructuring of the Democratic Party that's kind of happening right now.
I think there's two other variables. You have the people around Biden who are currently in positions of power around Biden who are trying to hold on to power, and they know that if it could go a different direction. I think RFK Jr., being on the Democratic primary, if that would have happened, it would have been a bloodbath.
Totally.
Well, and there's another example of not having real primaries.
Yeah.
A real contender came up and they just shut him down.
Yeah. They just didn't have a primary in Florida or things like that, right? Or they kept them off the ballot. So those sorts of actions kind of put Biden into this position where he's the presumptive nominee through fiat, and then they believe their own juice. They drank their own Kool-Aid, to the point where they're like, yeah, I mean, all this stuff, all these, what do they call them? Cheap fakes from the right are all just bullshit.
That lived and died very fast.
Yeah, no one believes it. Only an idiot would believe it. He's obviously all these things, and they said that so much that they began to believe it. And then they saw him on the primary when he on the debate stage when it really mattered, and he flubbed it. So now they're like, okay, how do we get rid of it and go to a different place?
Well, when it is that thing is when we covered the State of the Union address, he actually did quite well. You're like, okay, he's aged a little bit. He's not as sharp as he once was back when he was vice president. But on the State of the Union, he was fairly high energy. I was surprised by that. Right. I was actually almost questioning myself. I was like, maybe I have seen a lot of things out of context, because he managed to handle 2 hours pretty well. Yeah. But they souped him up on whatever concoction that they souped him up for that. And when it came to this debate, he was not on the juice.
No, he was not on the good stuff.
Well, they put around that he had a cold, right?
Oh yeah, he just had a little cold.
He didn't sound. Well,
he said a little cold.
He did
coughed a bunch.
He did sound a little hoarse.
Yeah, sure. Right. So that whole.
But if a cold can derail you, cognitively,
can derail the president of the United States
in that way.
And did this look?
Yeah, the staring off into space. I mean, it was not a good look. Obviously, he didn't get the cocktail that he got at the State of the Union, and also it's a very different thing to read a script or a teleprompter than it is to actually debate someone in live conversation.
Although at the State of the Union, he was kind of doing bounce backs with the crowd when the Republicans were booing and stuff like that, and he managed to navigate that politically pretty well, I thought, at the time.
Sure.
We do have there was a leaked footage of Donald Trump on the golf course talking about this that is being passed around, and it's pretty funny to see the how people are interpreting this, where it's like everybody that likes Trump, they're just like, yeah, that's why I like him. And everybody that hates Trump, they're just like, can you believe he said this? But I think like the average person's looking at this clip and, well, you be the judge of yourself here. So here's Trump on the golf course.
How did I do with the debate the other night?
Oh, fantastic.
Keep that old broken down pile of crap.
Yeah.
It's a bad guy. He just quit, He's quitting the race. Is that right? Yep, I got him out of the race. And that means we have Kamala. I think she's going to be better. She's so bad. She's so pathetic.
Oh no.
She's just so fucking bad. So can't imagine. But can you imagine that guy dealing with Putin and the president of China, who's a fierce person? He's a fierce man, a very tough guy. And they see him. They probably he can't. But they just announced he's probably quitting.
Good.
Very good.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You just keep knocking him out, right?
Thank you.
So I think he looks like relatively human. It's like very actually humanizing.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I'm seeing lefties are posting that and seeing like, this is why he's awful. And people on the right are like,
this is why I like
looks kind of human.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Looks like a guy at the golf course talking shit, which is kind of what you do at the golf course.
paying the cart girl like a couple $100 for a beer.
Well, and Trump, judging by that, Trump seems to think that the actual competition is going to be Kamala. But I'm saying competition in quotes.
Right,
It's
right.
like
we're getting Kamala.
And there's a lot of signal counter signaling going on, right? You have that as a counter signal, like that's insider information that he could potentially be getting. But we do have some other reports, like the Associated Press put out this tweet that is just so funny. Biden at 81, sharp and focused, but sometimes confused and forgetful. Just think about that title for a minute.
Aren't those directly contradictory statements?
Sharp and focused, but sometimes confused and forgetful. And you're just like, what are you doing? Is this reporting? What are we doing here? Like, is this not just coverage?
Dude, this is
of trying to make it sound like it's normal or something
this
is okay for a president
has
to be.
no clothes.
Totally. This is
situation, right?
like the total state of the mainstream, the legacy media here, right? Like you remember the headline? It was like, the earth is warming, but also it was cooling by accident. Like, what are you trying to say?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Then you have
but AP has standards around things about global warming and stuff like that, so they have to, and that everybody has to subscribe to for proper journalism.
Is that
and things
right?
like that.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, there's a whole AP standardized practice on how journalism is supposed to work, and it's what you learn when you go to like broadcast journalism
the AP
school
style
and all this
guide.
stuff. Yeah,
but
all
that's
that stuff.
that's all around like mechanics of writing and how to cite
No,
sources. and
there's
stuff.
like ideological stuff that's laden inside of that.
Is
too.
that right?
Yeah.
No kidding.
No, like if you just look it up, like go to the Wikipedia page, it'll be like these types of things got about like gender identity and like about climate change, and like these are the ways that you're supposed to talk about them. These are the proper definitions of using them, and they're all part of the AP style guidelines and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of that juice that's going on, because that's a very useful control the way that you're supposed to talk about things, and you control the entire narratives, right?
Indeed.
But those things are broken down because people aren't going through those normal sources for all their news anymore.
That's
like
right. They're
people
going
are
through
outside
human
of it.
reaction. Pod.com.
We don't subscribe to AP style narrative. Yeah.
That's why I speak in broken English most of the time. So it's confused and forgetful. So if you can turn dementia into confused and forgetful, that's a win right now for them. That's how bad it is. I also have a Wall Street Journal report. Biden moves to shore up support as Democrat unity tanks. This is about him basically going around and calling up old donors, trying to get him back on his side. I have the YouTube Anon Ally says the president privately acknowledged he's on the ropes.
Before we get to that, because I just pulled up their Wikipedia here. The stuff is they add every year they add new things into the AP style book, and things will be like they, them, their pronouns, critical race theory, anti-vaxxer, cryptocurrency, right? Like they have all these proper ways of viewing everything, right? Podcasts.
Bud tender.
What's a bud tender?
That's someone who will help you out like a dispensary, like serve you, like sell you cannabis.
Oh, cool.
So apparently the AP has got rules around using the term bud
As
tender.
opposed to
And
bartender.
it's
as
important.
opposed to drug dealer, I think. Yeah.
And it's important to notice is that this is just developed by a corporation, right? Which is,
it's not
like
true. Yep. Wow.
But let me pull that video there quick because I was doing that.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news, CNN has learned President Biden has privately acknowledged a series of critical tests are ahead in the next stretch of days. Those tests essential to determining whether he can stay in the race for the White House. CNN White House correspondent MJ Lee joining us now. MJ, what more are you learning?
Erica, what I'm learning, and this is according to an ally of the president's who spoke with the president directly yesterday, is that the president has privately acknowledged that the next stretch of days are going to be so critical to the question of whether he can save his re-election campaign. The president, made clear to this ally in this conversation yesterday that he understands what circumstances would prompt him to basically accept it's just not working. This person who spoke to the president telling me that he sees the moment, he is clear-eyed, and they said that the president is very clear on the series of potential events that could come in the coming days that would prompt him again to accept that what he's trying to do to turn the narrative, turn his campaign around, isn't working. This person said, quote, the polls are plummeting, the fundraising is drying up, and the interviews are going badly. He's not oblivious. This is, of course, the person paraphrasing the conversation that they had with the president yesterday. As you know, this is a really significant window into how the president is going to be handling the next important stretch for his campaign. His campaign is in an existential crisis right now ever since that terrible debate performance last week, and he is under tremendous amount of pressure right now from Democratic Party leaders, from donors, voters who have said last week, really demonstrated that he is not up for running for re-election or even finishing out the term.
Okay, guys, I have a crazy theory here. Hear me out. And I sent it to you via text. Hunter Biden, 2024.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a continuation of the Biden legacy. Obviously, Joe has said Hunter is the smartest man I know, quote unquote.
True.
He's now very closely
He's
advising.
a famous artist.
He's a famous artist. Is he not a convicted felon?
Yeah.
Okay, so look, Trump is winning
gun charges. He's pro Second Amendment.
That's right. He's pro Second Amendment. Trump is winning a lot of votes, especially like urban voters, right? With his whole all the indictments and stuff. Now he's a convicted felon. His mugshots on the t-shirts. Hunter can wield that same political energy.
I would probably be more Team Hunter than Team Kamala.
Oh, I for sure would.
Probably.
But can you imagine? Well, I mean, I just can't. But can you imagine he's actually the president?
Could you imagine the Venn diagrams?
It is funny that just in the aftermath of all this, the entire way of viewing this thing is just like, yeah, we all have bad debates. Like Obama even said that he's like, I've had bad debates before too. He tweeted that out and he was like, but you still need to support blah, blah, blah. It was like, sure, Biden had a bad debate. Sure, he's aging, but at least he doesn't lie. That's the framing that they're trying to operate under right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would rather have a senile but honest president than a cogent liar.
It's worse than that. That was their initial. It was like he has a cold, but at least he didn't lie, etc. He answered all the questions, and now it's we know there's an existential crisis, and the best we can hope is that he knows that there's an existential crisis. Right? That's a crazy one too. People have such low confidence in him. They're like, does he even realize that he's about to lose?
Yeah, he's not
oblivious.
oblivious.
They're trying to send the signal. No, he knows there's a problem here. That's what that news story means. And that was intentionally released by the campaign to send a signal to somebody about the state of where Biden's actually at mentally, capable of knowing that he's on the ropes.
Good job, Joe. You answered all the questions.
So Trump being up by a 6-point lead nationally is huge.
Trump is up by 6 points.
6-point lead, which is these are the margin errors between 4 or 5%. So it's out of margin. That means that's a strong signal. With 80% saying the president is too old to run for a second term. 80%. Trump is up in Pennsylvania, and leading in New Hampshire. He's up 4 in Michigan. These are states that are really critical. He's up by like 20 in Iowa, which is right next to Wisconsin and other places like that. That could be a very, very bad place for like the low turnout, more rural voters to come out big for Trump and not get any for Biden.
Do we have the leaked Democratic polling map that shows red and blue states?
I know what you're talking about.
Because that could be signal counter signal thing too, right, David? Like that could be, trying to point to
it was a big
Republicans
red wave.
saying, "Oh yeah, it's gonna be a bloodbath. Republicans are gonna win across the board," to try to disincentivize people from feeling like they have to vote, or to motivate the deep blue base to really rally or do whatever they can. But it was not looking good. It was like the sliver of the West Coast, just New England, and then like Illinois.
I found it,
and the rest is red. It did not look good.
Wokeness.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Wait, is this electoral college votes?
It's
according to leaked polling numbers from Democratic firm Open Labs, this map falls within the margin of error. Again, this is from
this is within the margin of error.
That means he wins Georgia, Pennsylvania. Oh man, that is bad.
It's not looking good for
it's not quite that, but it's like Reagan levels of landslide.
Yeah,
like, it's not quite there, but
it'd be really bad. The interesting thing here is the degree to which there is that this. So this could be a leak that could say that there is trying to generate energy. It can also discourage, and that's what we're actually witnessing right now with a lot of this. Everything I'm hearing is that the down ballot effects are the opposite direction that they usually are, meaning usually the popularity of your lead guy pulls your other people along and it makes them more popular, but it's actually the opposite direction now. Biden is sinking other Democrats on the ballot. And as that goes, there's less reason for those Democrats to go close to him. And they should be like, hey, look, I really want Biden. I think he's too old. Once that becomes the way that you maintain power, Biden's done.
Yeah, it's time for fresh energy in the party. Like there's going to start to be those types of narratives that start to come in. And
yes,
interesting.
Like the whole Democratic Party right now, I think, is in for kind of a rude restructuring as it stands in the moment.
So am I hearing you right? Are you guys in the camp of this was always the plan, so that there wouldn't be a primary and get Kamala in, or is it that we just they screwed up and this is where they wound up to?
I think that there was always a desire to do it, but they're doing it way too late. Like I thought that back in like 2021, I was saying that I think that sometime before 2024, they're going to try to find some way to get rid of him. In order to put a new fresh face and start to groom new people in for the future of the party. I always felt that way. I started being like, well, maybe they're not going to do that. And then they announced the debate and I'm like, oh wait, are they doing it? Yeah. Because the whole debate thing is an anomaly.
Yes.
Them doing it so early, and they're the ones that put the challenge forward. Like it came from the Biden camp that Trump's going to be too afraid to debate me. I'm going to debate him, early. It was very strange. All of that was strange.
Yeah, that definitely
very completely.
I'm not sure I agree with you that the debate format was intentional. You're saying it's intentionally anti-Biden? Because I always kind of thought, when I first saw it, I thought this looks like it harms Trump because he feeds off the crowd, things like that. And the turning off the mics and stuff like that, that it would be more technically better for Biden. But Biden just did so bad. It looked bad for him.
Yeah, I feel like there was an intent to help Biden with the debate format.
Yes,
but it kind of backfired. I think it backfired.
I agree with that. I don't think it was necessarily intentionally against Biden, but it certainly did not work in his favor the way they thought it would. I mean, allowing him 2 minutes to just ramble is a terrible idea. Like, who would at least?
But that's what you want every
interrupted.
politician to have. You want your politician to get up there and talk as much as you can.
Yeah,
while
but
you're
not
there.
if he can't string thoughts together. And if you and here's where I
they
think
drink their own Kool-Aid. They think he can.
Exactly. And I think this, to answer your question, I don't think, I think on our side, I think looking in on the Democratic Party, being so organized, being so like proficient at electioneering, it's easy to look at them like a monolith, right? That they're all aligned. But I don't think there's alignment. And I don't think there has been for a long time.
There's Venn diagrams.
There's Venn diagrams. And I think what's probably been going on is that they're, like you said, it wasn't intentional to run Biden maybe in the first place. Maybe there's been a faction of the party that's wanted to replace him for a long time. I think there's a faction of the parties, particularly as in a circle, that have said, look, he's our guy. We're in power. We don't want to lose power. It's really awkward to figure out how to get him out and also maybe get Kamala out because she's unpopular. So we just have to run with this until they just can't. They can't keep this cat in the bag forever. The cat of the dude can't actually string thoughts together. So I think they're in triage mode right now. And I don't think that it's necessarily strategic, but they're strategic thinkers. They've got people in the background saying, okay, how do we game plan this out? Like, what does this look like? How do we actually like gracefully exit this? I think that's the situation we're in right now.
And actually, to continue on my thoughts around the Biden, I don't think he was the planned nominee and all this stuff from back in the day. Unfortunately, there's no record of me saying this because we didn't have a podcast at the time. But back in 2020, I was saying that I believe Burisma was going to be a control point on Biden as a means of controlling him when all the Burisma stuff was happening. And this was pre-Ukrainian warfare and stuff like, because I did a big deep dive onto the Hunter Biden Burisma stuff when the Trump quid pro quo impeachment thing was going on with the weapons deal, with all that stuff. And I always felt like the Ukraine thing was going to be a lever for the deep state, quote unquote, as a control mechanism over top of Biden, and especially with leveraging Hunter's involvement in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
and which I think is somewhat true. It might not be as deep as I kind of initially thought it was, but that's been there in the background of this entire administration.
Yeah,
right?
it's just that you don't need to control him, right? The deep state, he is the deep state, right? Is like he's a
vessel. He's more so a vessel.
Well, look, check out this video. The non-ally says the president privately acknowledged he's on. No, sorry, not that one. The deep state doesn't think it's a problem. So this is his Homeland Security, guy. I think articulating exactly how the people around Biden are thinking about this right now. And a way most people have been justifying it, those who are in the know, who weren't drinking their own Kool-Aid, have been justifying it for all this time, and then found themselves in this kind of irreparable place that they've now wound themselves up in.
A presidency is more than just one man, one woman. It's an administration. I would take Joe Biden his worst day at age 86. So long as he has people around him like Avril Haines, Samantha Power, Gina Raimondo supporting him over Donald Trump any day with the crowd that was behind him on January 6, 2021.
Former Secretary.
A president.
So that's obviously a practice line. But that's exactly the dangerous thing, is that's a practice line, right? That he's like saying, it doesn't matter who the president says. What really matters is the people that are behind him and around him to really set the agenda, to really do what's going on. And we've made these jokes forever now. And if you're a Human Reaction listener, you know that the president has been in control this entire time. That said, for a lot of America, they're just discovering this now. And if like the noise should be, oh my God, a person with dementia is president.
Yeah.
Not, oh, he's got really great people around him. Look at our Secretary of State. He plays the guitar. Do you know that? Like,
well, and that's the thing is this is one of the things that was so refreshing about Vivek in the primary is this is the type of stuff he was just saying openly on the debate stage, right? Is like he would just be straight up saying, it's just like, we all know Biden's not actually your nominee. Like, and he was saying this last year or earlier this year during the debates, right?
It was like February he was saying this stuff.
Yeah, right. And he was just saying like there's all these people that are around it, and he's kind of educating people on how these things actually work and not kind of the fantasy Candyland views that people have about politics, right? And a lot of the stuff in the Trump era, I think people have just generally woken up to, and they've been shaken out of the Candyland fantasy, right?
Yeah. Well, and I guess I that causes me to wonder, does it even really matter? And this is so like cynical, probably. Does it even really matter the president has dementia? Right? Because is there any difference between the president having dementia and the president being captured by some sort of blackmail thing, right? Or just being in an apparatus that is so much larger and more powerful than a singular person? The deep state's running the show either way. In one case, with the case of Joe Biden, now we just get to see how powerful the apparatus is around him because it's so very clear that there is a vacuum in the Oval Office because he's obviously not running things.
Well, and the big thing is like, a lot of people are just like, if my guy just gets elected, everything's going to be right. It's like, no, if your guy gets elected, that's like step one to decades of work that needs to be done to be able to dismantle this stuff so that the executive can actually do things that you want them to do and actually represent the quote unquote will of the people. Like there's all this stuff in the way that actually that muddies everything, and because the system is moving into a very specific direction and all the incentives are in place for it to move in that direction right now. Like all the stuff that we're covering with the Supreme Court cases and stuff, those are starting to be like the progressive era apparatus that's been built up over a century, right? Those are starting to, we're like little pieces are starting to fall off it. But we're not even close to done, right?
Yeah, right. And it's, you also need Congress in your, not in your way, in order to get the kind of change you need if you're going to reform the deep state and those sorts of things too. So like you need statutorily change a lot of things. And you need a president who actually wants to reduce presidential power. You need all kinds of things that are very rare and difficult to happen in order to get that kind of thing changed. So to the degree to which, we know that, and human reaction listeners will know, that the president was lied to by his own generals on troop movements and the withdrawal from Afghanistan and Syria. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not unrealistic to see that this could be happening in very much smaller areas in the Department of Transportation or Department of Education or other sorts of things from low-level bureaucrats. So yeah, I mean, is the deep state a huge thing? But I don't know if this is a signal that the deep state is more powerful and therefore it doesn't matter who becomes president, Trump versus Biden. I think it means that if you see things for as they really are, it suddenly makes sense why so many people would agree on things and there's so little ideological diversity within a party, within an outlook, within a view that otherwise should orientate differently to these sorts of things. And it traditionally, if you know anything about history, has in the past. And that the mechanisms of change of this are going to take a lot of time, are going to be very slow, but it's by your awareness of them, your activism, your speech around it that makes the difference in the long run to actually build up the infrastructure to make the change. So it's very slow and then very sudden.
Well, and the big thing is the most important area to be able to actually get these things moving is that people in general have to wake up and dispel the illusions of what all these systems are. Yes. They have to cut off the mousetraps in their heads about like this or that. They have to be able to understand that like government isn't just necessarily this beneficial entity that is just like, oh, it's just serving you. Like there might be some good things that come out of government. Like, I'm not going to say that there aren't that, but there might be better ways of going about that. Right. But all of those illusions and like the magic words that are used to cast a spell on you to kind of keep you focused in a certain direction, you have to start being more conscious of those things. And luckily, because of the internet, I think people are becoming way more conscious in general, especially as all the chaos is brewing. Like people are beginning to wake up. Is it a majority of people? No. Do you need a majority of people? No. Right? Like, the revolution was only fought by like 3%. Like, isn't that like the whole thing, right? You don't need everybody on board to be able to understand it. You just need a very strong minority that actually kind of understands the reality of the situation to be able to move things in a different direction. And most people are sheep and they'll just go along with it. So like if you start making it's cool to think this way about things, the majority of people will start moving in that direction. The new generation will start moving there. And right now, the old ways is becoming kind of like, and there's a counterculture that's forming. That counterculture is the future, I think, right?
Absolutely. And given the event, the day, Independence Day that we're recording this, I'm going to read this Samuel Adams quote that you just referenced. It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men.
I like to think that I planned that reference.
I think you did.
Yeah.
I think you did.
I didn't.
So the whole effort of the podcast right there. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Sam Adams listens to the podcast. He's got it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He stole that from me, actually.
Brews great beer, too.
Let's move on to, as we're, we've gone pretty long here. Let's move on to the Project 2025 stuff.
Before we do, I need to take a quick break. Okay, we're back.
So the
hold on, let me do that again.
Maybe I should be saying fishing for dicks while we
fishing for dicks.
That's what Project 2025 is against.
Okay, real quick, just to clear the air. All right.
Back in.
And we're back. All right, Kyle, lead us off.
Well, so the last couple of weeks, the libs have been freaking out because there's been a plan that's been introduced from the Heritage Foundation called Project 2025. And essentially what it is laying out like policy ideas and staffing decisions for a future Trump administration. A lot of people are saying that this is coming directly from Trump. It's not really. There's some Venn diagrams there, right? Like there's overlap. People on the Heritage Foundation used to work with Trump and all this stuff. Trump's real plan is Agenda 47, which is just a funny name. If you know, kind of thing. But what we have right here is I want to show you a little bit of the coverage that I've seen around this and just the media freak out and just
Mark
the liberal
Ruffalo.
freak. Yeah, Mark Ruffalo, the Incredible Hulk, is very upset and angry about this.
no!
Is he turning green
Project
over it?
2025 is not a game. It's white Christian nationalism. It is the Sharia law of the Christian crazy people who aren't Christian at all but want to control every aspect of your life through their narrow and exclusionary interpretation of Christ's egalitarian, inclusive, and kindly teachings. Right? You get the idea. There's a lot of the again, a lot of magic words there, right?
A lot of triggers.
Jesus basically just said, like, be cool to gay people, man. That's that. I remember that part of the New
That
Testament.
was what was said. But what he was doing, he was quote tweeting from the Human Rights Campaign, which was a video of the BET Awards, where they had a bunch of words and they had a whole thing about it right here.
Time for us to play chess, not checkers. It's about making decisions that will affect us as human beings, our careers, our next generations to come. Did you know that it is now a crime to be homeless?
What?
Pay attention.
Not exactly.
It's not a secret. Look it
Pay
up.
attention, guys.
They are attacking our most vulnerable citizens. The Project 2025 plan is not a game. Look it up. Time for us to play chess.
It's
not
funny because it kind of reminds me of like Agenda 21 back in the day, which was an actual plan put forward in the UN, right? And you know,
adopted by the UN.
And conservatives would be like, Agenda 21, man, they're trying to do all this stuff, and everybody's like, that's crazy talk, right? This is what this is sounding like right now to me.
Look it up! You know.
Look it up!
Total Alex Jones.
I have the documents.
Well, now it's Agenda 2030 that they have.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they just updated
They
it.
just keep updating it and extending it.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
always
it's a climate plan. It's a climate policy plan.
Yeah,
But
and they're
with a
turning
lot
the
of
frickin'
crazy
frogs gay,
implications.
okay?
I'm not saying that to diminish it. I'm just saying it's a real thing, and it shouldn't be considered a crazy conspiracy theory because it's just what they called their climate plan thing. I mean, and then you said I don't like the UN's climate plan thing. It sounded insane.
Totally.
You
It's
said,
just
I
like
Agenda 30.
geoengineering creating enormous hurricanes early in the season.
Anyways, so Project 2025 is getting all this attention from the left.
It's a real thing. Look it up.
The next I want to do, Harry Sisson, who's this like young kid that's just a paid Democratic operative that's gotten really big on TikTok. He's talking about
He sucks.
what the F, WTF, the leader of Trump's Project 2025 plan just made a chilling threat. We are in the process of a second American revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. What? This is insane. We cannot allow Trump to win. So here is that clip.
That we are in the process of the second American revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. That we are in the
right. That type of rhetoric.
Wow. Scary.
Wow.
By definition, scary.
We got Hillary Clinton. Project 2025 is the MAGA movement's plan to consolidate power under a re-elected Trump and exert more control over everyday Americans' lives. Think I'm exaggerating? Read it for yourself. Here's a taste of Trump's Project 2025.
From Joe Biden's website, mind you.
Yeah, it goes to
Joe Biden's project.
Good point. And then here's a taste of Trump's Project 2025. Takes away reproductive freedom nationwide, uses the presidency for revenge on Trump's political and personal enemies, terminates the Constitution, consolidates power in the Oval Office, guts democratic checks and balances on presidential power, gives handouts to the ultra wealthy paid for the working by working families, and much, much, much more.
Wow.
Dude, terminates the Constitution. We need
ridiculousness.
We need to cut in a clip of Terminator
This
there.
right here, this right here was one of my favorites. r/politics was going crazy. I had a friend send me this. You're kidding yourself if you think this is hyperbole. They're the minority and present. They're the minority at present and have already accomplished major policy goals: Roe v. Wade, Chevron, Trump immunity. It'll be nice to win in November, but they've mostly already gotten away with the heist. Unless we win in November and reform the Supreme Court, who gives a fuck? They're promising to repeal the 20th century. You've no idea how much further the plan is going. I'm just like, I'm kind of down with repealing the 20th century.
I love this one. Back to the 50s, the 1850s, if not the 1650s.
Oh, no.
I'm kind of down to repeal the 20th century. So if that's what this plan is, I'm kind of down for it. But I looked in the plan. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you mean it doesn't get rid of the dishwasher?
No, and it doesn't get rid of the Constitution. I'm pretty sure it doesn't do that either.
I know where you're going with that, Joe. I know where you're going. I know what you're going to do. I was setting you up. I was throwing it in like T-balls. Like,
that was a soft.
Do you have something you want to say, Joe?
No, I don't. Okay. So what's in this
red
plan?
dresses, little white hats? Right. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Your whole politics breaks down to a movie that's not real.
It's actually a TV show.
TV show.
Fantasies.
That's even worse.
So some highlights that I just went through digging through. It was a big document. I didn't read it through it all. It's like every single little thing on the website points you to like a 30-page document about that specific thing, and there's just like a countless amount of that.
Sounds like an average bill in
You
Congress.
can't expect me to do all of that research.
It's exceptionally detailed.
It is very detailed.
Which is to its favor, really. I mean, it is asking for very particularized and detailed reforms.
But here's some highlights from it. Abolishing the Department of Education.
Love it.
Which Trump has already stated is like a part of his policy agenda.
Yep.
Reject abortion as healthcare, which is actually, I think, goes against what Trump's been saying, because I think he doesn't want to weigh in and he just wants the states to decide. That seems to be his rhetoric. Which that's another area where this is the Heritage Foundation. It's not Trump.
Remember. But I do think Trump has mentioned publicly funded abortions.
Yes, the publicly funded thing is an aspect of this, and that is something that would be Trump
and
policy,
most clearly,
right?
and the most easy to argue, right? I mean, this is a whole different thing.
Yeah, because I think what they're worried about here is like the federal abortion ban, which is not part of the Trump agenda. But when we're talking about like publicly funded abortion, that's a different story, right?
Yeah.
That's a
which is the same thing to them.
Yeah, which is the same thing to them.
Because how else do you create your slush fund?
Exactly. Yeah. Terminating DEI and various legal protections around discrimination, especially discrimination when it comes to like work practices and stuff like that. They're eliminating those like barriers that exist there, and also just terminating DEI as a whole.
Oh, so they're allowing discrimination in the workplace.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
So they're promoting racism in the workplace.
Exactly.
Why are you racist?
That is what they're worried about, right?
Look it up, okay? Look it up.
Project 2025 is a real thing. Look it up. Reducing environmental regulations, massive staffing shifts in major departments such as the DOJ, the FBI, the FCC, FTC, etc.
Why are you anti-Semitic? I'm really just quoting Jimmy Dore with Candace Owens on it. It's just hilarious. Anyway, continue.
Also eliminating their independence from the executive branch, because there's a lot of independence that goes on with the FBI and the CIA that the president no longer really has the authority over, and it's trying to move that back in that direction. So the agencies actually operate under the executive branch as they should.
Which is a huge part of the deep state phenomena, right? Of the president changing but nothing changing, right? Because you can't actually tell them what to do.
Dismantling the DHS, taking the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 even further with a bunch of there was a lot of debate on what those numbers should be within the document from what I saw, but it is more tax cuts as a whole, like across the board, everywhere pretty much. Mass deportations of illegal immigrants. That's one that they obviously have a lot of problems with, right?
Well, then they can't vote for the Democrats. Not just playing.
Yep. Project 2025, look it up. Moving towards freer banking and commodity-backed currency.
Ooh.
That's a major one. They had a whole detail, like 30 pages on that. Interestingly, the document has actually split. There's a few areas of the document where they're split, where it's like they don't even have clear, like they have one person on one side of the argument and one person on another side of the argument, and one of that is around trade, where they have like a whole argumentation for fair trade and implementation of tariffs, and then they also have a whole other person in there that has another portion of the document that is on free trade, and they're kind of battling it out within the document. So there's like, it's like an area of contention which exists there, which I think all of us would be much more in the free trade category of that document rather than the fair trade category with tariffs and things like that.
But I appreciate that they've provided argumentation on both sides.
Yeah,
that's like a very like transparent way of discussing that issue.
One thing, if you're good.
No, go for it.
It's interesting, dismantling DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. The Heritage Institute is why we have the Department of Homeland Security.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Explain.
Continue.
Explain.
In 2005, the Heritage Institute's research on DHS reform was cited by the Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff as a key reference point for rethinking the department's structure and missions. So from the very beginnings of it, the Heritage Institute has been engaging in Department of Homeland Security as a like major function of the department, like doing GWAT and doing all that sort of thing. They are like a fusion center for all the different parts of security going into one place. That's a Heritage Institute idea.
Interesting.
There was a bunch of stuff in foreign policy in there too, which was a lot of, I didn't look through it all. Like there was like a whole massive section with multiple different subsections of it that all had like 20 pages each, where it looked like there was a lot of like areas of military practices that I think us as libertarians would be leery on. There was a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
But there was also a lot of reformulating how we view foreign policy, of things much more within our national interest rather than, which is kind of like moving things into a little bit more, the rhetoric seemed to move more into the America First type of
more realism.
Yeah, move of a little bit more realism. Whereas, so like, I think the foreign policy stuff in the document was probably a mixed bag.
Which which would be a good thing for Heritage if that happens, because they've been traditionally a very hawkish think tank. So I mean, even if they're just
a lot of
making
neocon
homages
stuff
to
there.
realism, would be better than nothing. I didn't see any. I only looked at two parts, which is their intel agency stuff and their DoD stuff, and all their DoD realignment had nothing to do with like base realignment, NATO realignment. It didn't have any of that stuff, which was really disappointing, especially NATO, which is like, it's very clear that NATO reform needs to happen at this point. And then the intel community reform didn't really have any privacy reforms. There wasn't anything about the censorship industrial complex or anything of substance there, which is, I think we've won when things like those are in those sorts of documents. Like when America First means, no, intel agencies can't try to screw around with their social medias, with their social media companies, right? To censor ideas they don't like. When
Get your
it's
hands
saying,
off my tank talk.
Yeah, in order to be a good conservative, you have to understand that that NATO is bad for America and our entangling alliances are bad, and that's in the document, then we've really won.
Well, and that's the thing is, and remember, this is Heritage Foundation. It's not Trump's Agenda 47, right? Like, and those are different, and that's important to realize. And it is one of those things where a lot of those things are currently being battled out within the conservative ethos of the kind of old school neoconservative influence versus the new America First realism-ish type of influence when it comes to those types of practices, right?
Yeah, that's why I say it's like a load point for when you've won, for sure. I think I think
that there's a lot of boomerisms that are going to exist there, and it's just as long as the boomers continue to have power, that's going to exist there. But as soon as that generation's out of power, I think that's where the real flip happens.
Dominoes will start to fall potentially. We'll see. Why do you think the liberals are freaking out about this right now? Like it seems out of proportion with. The Heritage Institute is important, but it's not that important.
Well, I mean, I think
it's not. Is it, you know,
seen in the context of
it's not the Atlantic Council. It's not the Council on Foreign Relations.
I think I think some of it is we need to drum up some energy because energy is not looking good on our side right now. So it's like, oh my God, they're going to take abortion away even more. You know, like there's kind of like that type of stuff that they're trying to, and it's just like, look, they have words that are like Christian nationalism, and that's apparently a very scary thing now. You know, like there's those types of elements that I think are being at play right now.
Well, and I think seen in the context of all the Supreme Court decisions that have come down very recently as well, like. And the debate, and Roe, and all the other SCOTUS decisions that have been made before, like the momentum is very much moving one direction, and it's not just in this country. Obviously, it's global, across a lot of European nations and South America and all over the place. So it's like I think they're just like skidding down the hill, and they're just trying to dig their heels in on anything they freaking can. And this is just a thing that's like we can drum up the debate, the base a little bit on this.
Well, and that's the crazy thing is, and this has been such a weird thing to just watch, is the abortion thing is like the only thing that they have, and they're fabricating a lot of the things around Trump's position around this entirely.
They're just straight up like contradicting what he said directly in like his last 4 or 5 appearances.
And they're trying to. It's like the Roe v. Wade thing is just such a big deal to them, even though all it is just. Let's let the states decide. That's all it is. It's not a federal abortion ban or like, there doesn't seem to be any move for that, at least in the Trump administration. And it's when I watch people like after the debate, there's all these different Twitter threads of like these big hedge fund billionaires like Bill Ackman and things like that, or people like that, where they're putting out, this is why I'm supporting Trump, which is when you see people like that supporting Trump, it's just like, wow, that is a timeline I never saw. And they'll have like 3 paragraphs in there. It's like, you know what? I looked into Trump's abortion position and it's actually not that bad, actually, because like they're super pro. But it's also one of these things like, why do billionaire hedge fund? Why is this their issue? Like it's such a weird issue for them to have like this weird moral virtue point that they're trying to have.
Well, they already have all the money.
That's like
so
all
they
they
figure
have.
out
It's
other
like-
things that like gives life meaning.
It's
right?
it's probably the women in their lives.
Yeah, true.
Right. It's the women
The hedge fund wives.
Yeah.
That Tucker Carlson
The hedge
calls
fund
out.
wives. Yeah, right.
The private equity wives.
Tucker is so true about that. Tucker is so true about that.
What's your take, Dave?
I was kind of wondering if this is a "trust me, I'm lying" situation,
go
which is giving the Heritage Institute way more appearing clout and power than they actually really have. I mean, they had influence on the Bush administration for major reasons because they were closer to a monopoly at the time. AEI was them, and Heritage were pretty much the two big conservative think tanks. There's way more there now, and competitors there now. And Trump isn't that guy, right? He's not the think guy, right? He's not the big thought guy. He's kind of like the talker.
Yeah.
So I just don't see how they're using this as, and Heritage is playing into it. They're using this as their like leverage point to like boost up their own credibility as the whole left is freaking out about it, obviously for electoral reasons, but there's also trust me, I'm lying situation going on.
Can you clarify, just because we've talked about this before, but like, what is it that you mean when you say the "trust me, I'm lying" situation?
So you send the subtle signal to the press that basically says, hey, this is the real influence going on. The press goes, oh my God, and they're going to start talking about how bad this book is or how bad this thing is. And then all that negative coverage actually boosts your credibility and makes it a popular thing.
And it's a book by Ryan Holiday. Trust me, I'm lying. It's a very worthwhile book of understanding propaganda and kind of media manipulation and kind of how negative stories are used for good publicity and all that type of stuff.
Must
Any
read
publicity
book.
is good
Especially when it comes to like advertising and things. It's not just like government propaganda. It's just like how it influences advertising and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
like our jeans are controversial. And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to buy those jeans. They got tears in them. They're controversial.
Right. Like Kanye is a great example. Like he does some crazy thing, but his sales go up or whatever. You know?
Right.
Like, yeah, maybe he gets dropped by like Adidas or whatever, but still, like he'll do crazy stuff and it'll still boost sales in a weird way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, let's put a bow on this by looking at CNN's coverage of this. Again, tweeted from the Biden-Harris HQ account, because that's all the social media that they really have on that side.
They basically have these 4 pillars: policy, agenda, personnel. They're building out a huge network of, basically it was actually described to me as a dating website for conservatives, the kind of infrastructure to match conservatives with jobs in a potential administration, training them to work on day one, what that would look like, and a playbook for what the first 180 days would look like of a conservative administration.
So walk us through this policy agenda.
So basically they have these 4 parts within the policy agenda of what they say will make America better. And here are some of the ways that they say they do that: restoring the family at the centerpiece of American life, protecting our children, self-governance, dismantling the administrative state and returning self-governance to the American people. One of the things we've talked about extensively is one of the plans for, Donald Trump has said this himself as well, but also Project 2025.
No, keep going. This
Is to
part's really
essentially
important.
give more power to the executive branch and take some of these government agencies, and that would include agencies like the Department of Justice, and move them under the executive branch. So right now,
Wait.
Think about that for a minute.
Go ahead.
What part of the branch of government is the FBI in, lady?
The executive.
See, like, and that's the weird framework thing, because, I think to the normal person, they're going to hear that and they're like, yeah, we shouldn't give the president more power. They're going to have that. But the problem is we have a 4th branch of government now. Like, that's what these agencies have become. Yeah. And they're not operating within their constitutional bounds right now in how the current practice is, right?
Totally.
Like, that's the problem here.
The administrative state is in the executive branch. He's supposed to have power over them.
But he
Otherwise,
doesn't.
who do they answer to? And that's the thing, is that they answer to is like this milieu of the blob in DC, right? Yeah. And that blob is, when we think of, I don't like the word globalist, but you think of the word globalist, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is that thing there. The deep state is that thing there, that thing we're pointing to, that culture, that group of people, that collective identity that says that we're the people really in charge behind the scenes, and we're going to keep things regular. And we're going to make sure we scientifically administer the government and the state and the society and all these things for the security and benefit of the American people.
The expertocracy.
Exactly. So this the way she talks about it is just a big dip of the cards in that moment. So this is how we really think about it. Can't give the president power over his own FBI.
Or the DOJ.
Or the DOJ.
Yeah.
All right. I don't think we need to go further.
That's for
that.
Yep.
All right.
You get CNN's coverage.
That's fair.
We all get CNN's coverage, right?
Yes,
we all
yes,
get
we
it.
do. We do. And we don't need to give them more credit than they deserve either.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't
guys,
think that was a credible coverage. Fair. But absolutely.
Well, good stuff. Great episode. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. If you'd like to become a member and get some really cool perks, humanreactionpod.com. We will be in Las Vegas next week, so we're going to have a different episode. It's going to be an interview, and we'll be bringing you live stuff from the convention floor at Freedom Fest. Again, if you'd like to join us at Freedom Fest, freedomfest.com, July 10th through 13th. Enter the promo code HumanReaction50. Get $50 off your pass. We'd love to see you there. For David Rand, Kyle Mack, my name's Joe Sheehan.
And also, just before we close off, also
God,
we're going.
good.
But I just want to be able to pitch. We are going into our members only episode, and it's important to remind everybody that we do a whole nother episode for the people that pay us.
This is true.
And if you're on our Substack, if you're a paying member on our Substack, or you're a YouTube member, we have like another hour and a half of content we're about to do.
That's right. One of the cool things that you get when you go to humanreactionpod.com and you become a member is exclusive content, which we're about to do. Thank you, Kyle.
I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
that's all right.
We got to pay the bills somehow. You know?
You're right. Okay. For David Rand, Kyle Mack, I'm Joe Sheehan. This is Human Reaction. See you in the members only episode. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com. And remember,
what part of the branch of government is the FBI in, lady?
the executive branch.
That's the weird framework.